It all happened in the first year of the War of 10,000 Races, when countless monsters filled the earth and made it a battlefield for all creatures. One day, there were an incomparable number of monsters, and it seemed as if only they were allowed to rule fate and decide the world order. And although at the beginning of the war there were people with superpowers among humanity, their numbers were so small and they were so poorly prepared for battle that humans found themselves at a disadvantage. Humanity had no choice but to use firearms and nuclear weapons, so they barely managed to erect 10 defensive lines that could somehow hold back the onslaught of unexpected guests. But unfortunately, after 10 years of war, 2 defensive lines fell and people had to retreat. The deplorable situation worsened, the number of victims increased, and it was getting closer to the point that no one would survive. According to statistics, since the beginning of the war, the number of people killed during the defense in the Eastern Alliance alone has exceeded 1 million. And now, when there are fewer weapons and more people with superpowers, all states have turned to such people for help, requesting support on the battlefield. In order to return home and ensure a peaceful existence for the Earth, humanity had to constantly increase the size of the army and engage in battle with foreigners. Therefore, just 10 years after the start of the War of 10,000 Races, the largest conscription of all time was announced. In this bloody and merciless war, many people of different ages died, and most of them were children who had just reached adulthood. People understood the seriousness of the situation and what was happening around them, so they took various actions like Su Lei, who was only 22 years old and sacrificed herself by surrounding herself with explosives to prevent the monsters from crossing the bridge. The death toll over the past month has been incredibly huge, as if the army was fighting only to kill. Meanwhile, the veteran mayor declared that their deaths were not in vain, and they would definitely avenge them, because they were all their friends. They were all heroes of the Chinese state. It was a truly touching moment when no one even tried to hold back their emotions in order to appear strong in the eyes of others. The mayor also announced that the ninth line of defense had fallen a few months ago, and if the creatures continued in the same spirit, they would reach their city of Yecheng, which was part of the Eastern Alliance. However, despite the fact that most of the soldiers did not return, and the defensive lines fell one after another, the younger generation still did not lose heart and was ready to fight. No one wanted to stay on the sidelines, moreover. No one needed to be dragged into the army by force because the majority joined its ranks voluntarily. The situation was critical, so as many manpower as possible were needed in different areas. And one of these volunteers was a guy named Nan Ziying, 20 years old, born in Yecheng City, a student at the Faculty of Architecture of Yecheng University of Technology. And at that time, he had not yet awakened his superpowers. First of all, they recruited soldiers who were ready to fight on the front lines, for which they were respected and given various bonuses. But Ziying was not like that. He said that he wanted to stay in the rear. His decision caused a strong reaction and no one supported him, because there was an opinion that only children, old people, and women had the right to remain in the rear. Despite pressure from those around him and attempts to dissuade him, Ziying did not change his decision and firmly stated that this was his choice. Even his classmates who were nearby at that moment condemned him, but the guy didn't care what anyone thought. But among the crowd of condemners, there was one person who said that there was no reason to humiliate Ziying just because of his choice. This man was the veteran mayor. He noted that, of course, it was a pity that Ziying decided to remain in the rear because his results were quite indicative, but he did not try to convince him otherwise. Ziying became a rear guard, after which he went to get his uniform, and all the way he was accompanied by cries that he was a coward and a traitor. The next day, the newly assembled part of the army set out to carry out combat missions. All the soldiers were confident of their victory, and none of them thought that they might die. At this time, Ziying only watched as the young, barely trained soldiers were led to certain death. Meanwhile, the internet was furiously discussing Ziying's situation, but no one spoke in his defense. Everyone just insisted that a hero who did not die on the front lines did not deserve to live. Ziying knew that they were all right about him to some extent, but the battle that the young soldiers were being sent into was more like a battle between moths and a flame. People who are gathering an army of millions still underestimate the power of extraterrestrial races, and this was the main problem. In his past life, Ziying also joined the army early and went to the front lines. He was among the military command and became an experienced strategist. And while humanity was gradually retreating, Ziying devoted his entire life to studying the 5 talents, which he protected like a tree within himself. Ziying believed that by cultivating the 5 talents to the required level and forming an army around him, he could turn the tide of battle. But humanity fell before he could, and as a result, he died at the hands of the strongest being among the 1,000 races. However, back then, he refused to believe in such an outcome, saying that if only he had managed to pump up his talents a little earlier, he would have been able to protect humanity. Zing began to think that perhaps his obsession was to blame, or perhaps it was fate, but suddenly he was able to be reborn, and with him, the talent tree. The first was the beast taming talent tree, which could tame any race while simultaneously empowering them and controlling their actions, followed by the elemental talent tree, which allowed for the mastery of forbidden spells using different elements. Next came the Asura talent tree. The more kills committed, the stronger the body becomes, and when the number of kills reached a certain amount, the carrier turned into Asura, a demon capable of destroying everyone. And the last two were the formation talent tree. Mastering various formations with limitless possibilities allowed one to spread one's power, and the undead talent tree, awakening spirits and creating controllable undead. Although leveling up these 5 talents required a large amount of origin stones and time, once Ziying reached the maximum level, even if he was left alone, he would be able to resist all the creatures. And the reason he decided to stay in the rear was simple. If he went out onto the battlefield now, he wouldn't be able to kill the required number of monsters to get the attributes for leveling up, only needlessly risking his life and strength. That's why, if Ziying wanted to obtain as many origin stones as possible, the best way was to go to the testing ground where countless monsters lived. The young man decided not to delay, so he immediately went to the testing ground in the rear of the Yicheng City base in order to obtain the source stones and upgrade his talents as soon as possible. The testing ground was created in the first year of the war to train superpowers, but soon became just a warehouse for monster corpses, since no one came to train anymore. The workers at the testing ground often thought that it would be better to get rid of all the creatures and turn the monsters' bodies into rations for the military. At that moment, Ziying appeared to them, saying that he had come to the testing ground, since it seemed like they could use some extra hands here. A girl named Xiaoliu greeted him with a smile, saying that he had arrived just in time and asked him to come with her, so she could show him where he could change. However, not everyone was happy about Ziying's appearance. Auntie Wang, who had worked at the site for a long time, was interested in why the young man would come here at such a time. She immediately remembered what had recently been hotly discussed on the news. A young man named Zing from the city of Yicheng refused to go to the front lines. Zing aroused even more interest from the others. Many began to think that his conscience had finally awakened, and he had decided to become more active. And besides, the extra hands really weren't that bad. Liu was also interested in the young man. He became her hope that they could finally move forward at least a little. Besides, despite his silence, the girl found him very handsome. However, her romantic thoughts were interrupted by Aunt Wang, who warned Liu that this young man was the same Ziying who chickened out and refused to go to the front lines. Liu was extremely surprised because if he was a coward, then why did he suddenly decide to come to the training ground and fight mutants? Meanwhile, Ziying had begun an A-level test, and no one had ever passed this type of test before. As soon as Ziying confirmed the start of the test, a crowd of monsters immediately descended upon him. This was the beginning of a long night in which humanity had no way back. And for the sake of the future of the entire race, the question faced the young man. Was he ready to become a shadow that would remain only in the night? Is he willing to sacrifice everything to save everyone, even if he is hated and despised? Ziying knew that there was no turning back, so there was only a series of battles ahead. And the first thing he wanted to start with was the talent of taming animals. In his past life, on the front lines, the young man had already encountered not only foreigners, but also animals, such as the big-head bird, which has muscle memory and its weak spot is the back of its head. The mechanism for obtaining attributes remained the same as in the young man's previous life. By killing one big-headed bird, you can get one source stone and also add a tamed mutant beast to your piggy bank after killing it. However, Ziying was still a weakling, so he had to be careful not to die out of stupidity. And by avoiding serious injuries, he hoped to deal with all the beasts in a short time. After this, the young man plunged into the world of battles with mutants, fighting not only for his life but also for the future of humanity. The battles were very exhausting for him, and sometimes it seemed easier to retreat and surrender, but he continued to do his job. However, it didn't end with just the low-level monsters. Among the crowd of mutated beasts, there was also the strongest one, the king of the head-headed birds. He was significantly different in strength and skills from the other monsters. One could say that he was the boss of the trial. Despite the fact that the young man's physical skills left much to be desired, he did not give up and continued to fight, inflicting more and more damage on the beast. By then, it was already time for lunch, but Aunt Wong and Liu were in no hurry to go to the dining room, saying that they wanted to watch this performance for a little while longer. They were sure that Zing would run away home very soon, but they didn't want to let that happen. Liu noted that he chose the A-level test, which was equal in difficulty to the front line, but they couldn't be convinced. After some time, it was announced that the first floor of the A-level trial had been completed by participant Zing, thus setting a new record by killing 2,000 monsters. This caused great surprise among the others. They couldn't believe that Zing didn't retreat and was able to pass the A-level test. He was all wounded, as if there was not a single living place left on him. Nevertheless, the young man was able to prove his worth. Now the main problem was to deal with all the corpses, of which there seemed to be not 2,000 but hundreds of thousands. During the break, the young man decided to review his talent tree statistics. He managed to tame 2,000 beasts, raise the tamer level to the second, and the tamed beasts to the first. At the same time, it was announced that the army would soon begin an offensive, and then the young man realized that the son of the Thunder Punisher and the Fire Colossus, people with 7th level superpowers, had already arrived at the front lines. However, in their past life, they died almost immediately after entering the battlefield. The situation on the front lines was unpredictable, and the losses became even greater. On top of that, there was very little time left before the 8th defensive line fell, which meant that in order to change something, it was necessary to compete with time. Aunt Wong and Lee continued to clean the corpses, and Lee noted that the young man had really tried hard, since no one had ever managed to pass the A-level test before. But Wong continued to hate Zing for staying behind, saying that getting everything at once was useless and that everything should be approached gradually. She also noted that he had received quite serious injuries and might not return to duty, having finally started to shirk. However, their guesses turned out to be wrong, and after only a short rest, Ziying decided to continue passing the second floor. Wang was extremely surprised, asking him if he really wanted to go up to the second floor with such injuries. Liu also tried to convince him, saying that the beasts on the second floor were even bigger and stronger, and suggested that he rest a little while they looked for volunteers. But Ziying insisted and said that he was used to doing everything alone, so he would go alone right now. As a result, no one dared to stop him, and he went on to take the second floor of the A-level test. The atmosphere there was much more tense, and the monsters were much stronger, as if there was heaven and earth between the first and second floors. The young man was sure that he could cope, but the unexpected happened. Monsters appeared that were beyond his strength. Ziying had no advantage over such beasts, and the injuries he had previously sustained were still making themselves felt. However, the young man did not give up, because no matter how naive he seemed, he would not have attacked without proper preparation. Ziying decided to use all his skills and all the strength he had, and managed to pierce one of the huge monsters. Moreover, since the second-level mutant beasts could be tamed, he couldn't finish this floor by simply exterminating them. Ziying used the talent Taming Beasts, and it was as if an unknown power had awakened within him. The monster's eyes immediately changed, and a huge, sparkling field appeared around the young man, knocking the beasts off their feet. 3 days later, Zing was able to clear the second floor, killing over 10,000 beasts, and raise the level of the tamed beast and the beast tamer to 6. Now he can go to the wasteland tonight. In theory, even a level 5 person could go there, but due to the threat of people with superpowers and firearms, the beasts are ready to storm the city. In Ziying's case, taming beasts is a key part of his plan to fight all monsters. Meanwhile, while the young man was daydreaming, one of the workers at the landfill approached him to ask if they would have to work overtime today. But Ziying replied that it was not worth it, since he would be leaving early today, and Wang immediately said that he had probably chickened out and would now shirk. However, not everyone supported Wang, saying that she hated the young man in vain, since it was thanks to him that their work advanced a little more. Wang tried her best to deny that the young man was not a coward, but a capable guy, but it became more and more difficult to do so each time. Liu approached Ziying, saying that his progress in the tests was truly amazing, and suggested that he take a short rest since he had done a lot of work. However, Ziying told her that he still had some things to do, so there was no time to rest, and in the meantime, a bunch of wounded were brought into the city. Watching this, the young man was somewhat in despair, watching how people were thoughtlessly sent to their deaths under the pretext of defending the motherland. At the same time, rockets flew across the sky, and this was not a good sign. It meant that the front line was not coping and was requesting reinforcements. Zing also understood this and realized that the day of the fall of the vanguard was getting closer, and the time to become stronger was getting shorter. The young man decided to go to the wasteland to find a way to level up his talent tree faster. A group of soldiers were also moving through the wasteland, but an unexpected situation occurred. The car suddenly broke down. However, they couldn't stay in one place for long because there were a lot of mutant wolves nearby, and at that moment they noticed a strange silhouette running straight towards them. That someone was none other than Zing, who ran straight into the mutant wolves' lair. The boys began to worry that something would happen to him and shouted at him to stop, but Zing did not listen to them. However, the head doctor had already called the soldiers several times and asked them to hurry since he needed them. The boys were about to leave when suddenly what they feared most happened. They were attacked by mutant wolves. The two soldiers tried to escape, but by that time the wolves had already reached them. However, they did not retreat and decided to try to escape, after first trying to kill one of the monsters. Then gunshots rang out, which Zing also heard, and he wanted to go to their aid, but it was not easy. The fact is that the young man himself found himself in a difficult situation. He was surrounded by mutant wolves. But the young man did not consider this a problem, rather a gift from fate, because this way he would be able to save energy. Meanwhile, the two female soldiers continued to try to break away from the monsters, but they succeeded with difficulty. Ziying was fighting the wolves at the same time, trying to remain vigilant so that the monster wouldn't accidentally hit him. Moreover, the leader of the mutant wolves was among the rest, and this also played into the young man's hands. Ziying knew that in order to save the medical team, he had to first deal with the pack and especially their leader. At that moment, the young man used the talent Taming Beasts, and everything around him seemed to suddenly begin to change. Ziying's skills had indeed improved since the first test, and he was now even able to subdue the mutant wolf leader. After all, as the people say, if you shoot at a horseman, first shoot at his horse. Following this, Zing attacked the leader because if he tamed him first, it would be easier later. Meanwhile, the medical team continued to try to escape, despite all the difficulties. And suddenly the unexpected happened. The car suddenly stalled and refused to start. The wolves then immediately attacked, gnawing at the body of the car as if it were a pillow. But what was even more surprising was that the wolves suddenly retreated, and their eyes turned bright blue, and they themselves became friendly. And there was an explanation for this. Ziying was able to tame the leader, and then the rest of the monsters. Meanwhile, Ziying was also able to raise the level of the tamed beasts and the beast tamer to 7. The young man could not even imagine that he would acquire such pets in such a short time. Nevertheless, he decided to let the wolves go for now and go to other uninhabited areas to tame all the monsters there, because he needed an army of mutant beasts for the war. He also wanted to help the medics get to the city, but suddenly received a message from the warehouse about an urgent meeting, where his presence was mandatory. And this meeting was not connected with good news. On the contrary, the management stated that the landfill had greatly disappointed them. They said they expected the training ground to fulfill its plan and be able to help the front lines, but they did not live up to expectations. The participants of the training ground tried to explain the situation, saying that this was the first time they encountered mutant beasts above level 4, and that the rear was mostly made up of elderly people. They also added that they needed time to understand what they were dealing with, which angered management even more. The leadership did not like the fact that the training ground needed time, because there was not enough food on the front lines, and there were few animals left in the rear, so the stronger ones needed to be exterminated. The mayor noted that they would try to do something about it and send more people, but the commander said that he did not see anyone capable among them. Liu countered that it wasn't exactly like that. It was just that 4th-level beasts were beyond Ye Cheng's capabilities. However, the commander didn't care. He just kept repeating that they were all useless and that no one could be relied on. At this point, Aunt Wang, no longer able to contain herself, intervened and said that her husband and 3 sons had died on the front lines defending the motherland, and that the irresponsible ones were the command. The command also could not tolerate such words and was already preparing to use force. However, at that moment, the long-awaited Zing appeared and knocked out the commander's guard with a powerful blow. But the commander did not want to forgive the willfulness, took out a pistol, pointed it at the young man, and asked if he was really planning a rebellion. Looking at him, Ziying immediately recognized him. In his previous life, he became a traitor who became rich in war. He was executed in the 12th year, and he was called Bloodsucker from the Supply Line, Lin Yukai. Yukai was reselling military supplies destined for the front lines, and when it all came to light, it turned out that he had caused enormous damage to the country. He's probably monitoring the city's speed so that Yicheng can exterminate more high-level beasts, under the guise of helping, but in reality for the sake of resale. Zing knew that he needed to be dealt with, but first he needed to extract all the resources he had hidden away. After Yukai pointed a gun at the young man, the crowd rioted and everyone shouted that he was the one who was irresponsible for threatening those who were working for the front lines. However, he also recognized the young man, said that he was the same coward from the news, and asked if, after refusing to serve, he really had the audacity to raise his hand against a soldier. After this, Yukai ordered the youth to be eliminated, but Zing reminded him that it was he who had killed tens of thousands of monsters here, and by killing him, they would lose their food. Zing added that the monsters had already reached the level where they could possess people, and no one in the training grounds could handle it, so they would have to wait for their master class in extermination. Yukai realized that he was in a very difficult situation, and judging by the reactions of the others, the young man was telling the truth, so he had no choice but to accept it. In addition, having such a soldier in the rear would be beneficial to him, so Yukai decided to give him a military order. Tomorrow he will send 5,000 level 4 monsters here, and if the young man copes in a week, he will not touch him anymore. However, if the young man fails and does not cope, then his debt will become the responsibility of everyone present. After that, everyone became worried and said that they would help him. But Zing assured them that he would handle everything himself and that they had nothing to worry about. However, level 4 monsters had high defense and could also interfere with a person's mind. Moreover, the attributes from them could be sold for a lot of money, and at that moment the young man realized that Yukai had found a way to make money even here. But this also became a plus for Zing, because this way he would be able to level up the Asura tree, kill monsters, improve talents, and finish off Yukai. The next day, as Yukai had promised, 5,000 monsters were delivered to the Yicheng training ground. The full order was as follows. Ziying, a soldier of the Yicheng City Logistics Division, is obligated to get rid of 5,000 level 4 monsters and has 1 week to complete the task. In addition, as a soldier under Yukai's command, he is suspected of disobeying orders, inciting workers to riot, and attacking higher-ranking soldiers, and will be shot if he fails to comply. Execution was a cruel punishment, but no one could challenge the order. One of Yutsai's subordinates was ordered to shoot the young man in case of failure. He was sure that Ziying would fail and shoot him personally, but the young man replied that he was talking too much to convey an order. However, he did not attach any importance to Ziying's words, noting that it would even be useful for him to speak out before dying. Before Ziying went to fight the monsters, the others warned him that they usually used chloroform smoke for this, but almost all the anesthetics were taken to the front lines. However, Ziying didn't look worried, even though these monsters could affect a person's soul and mental state. However, no one believed in the young man's victory because everyone was sure that he would fail the task before a week had passed. Moreover, even if the young man survives, he will most likely go crazy and not realize that he is dying. On top of that, even if Ziying showed himself, the soldiers had already figured out how to prevent him from doing so. At the same time, Ziying was surrounded by monsters, and although they were paralyzed, he could feel their mental pressure. In addition, they could create illusions that would be extremely difficult for an ordinary person to cope with. However, Ziying was not an ordinary youth or soldier. He was on a completely different level from the others. The monsters did not limit themselves to illusions alone, and tried to shackle him in other ways. At that moment, ominous thoughts began to seep into the young man's head, trying to subjugate his mind. This put a lot of mental pressure on him, and the monsters were also digging into his memory, reminding him of his father's death. Ziying's consciousness gradually became clouded as the monsters tried to lure him over to their side. But the young man was not so easy to break, simply by saying ominous phrases and reminding him of his losses. Ziying declared that no matter how weak he was now, he would soon become the strongest and avenge everyone at any cost. There was an ominous energy floating around him that he wanted to use. Once he activated Asura's talent, his physical and mental strength would begin to grow exponentially. Ziying began to fight the darkness that was trying to penetrate his mind, but it was not as easy as he expected. Meanwhile, Yukai continued his machinations, reselling food intended for the front lines. The demand for goods grew every day because all countries had problems, and Yukai wanted to earn as much as possible, despite the fact that his subordinates also took a share. Moreover, Yukai was wary of secret checks from the military and wanted to find a place where he could work with high-level mutants without risk. At that moment, he received a call to report news regarding an order concerning the training ground, and Yukai was sure that it was about the death of a young man. However, everything turned out differently. Only 4 days had passed since the start of the mission, and Zing had already killed almost all the monsters. Yukai was extremely surprised and could not believe the truth, and he was also informed that the young man did not receive any serious injuries. Nevertheless, Yukai was even a little happy and ordered to keep an eye on him, and if he started acting suspiciously, to shoot him immediately. Ziying was studying the talent tree at this time. He raised Asura to level 5, he was only missing 500 experience, and he opened the talent Blade of Evil, which added a cut effect, ignoring the enemy's defense for 5 seconds. Over these days, he had become stronger both physically and spiritually, and although he had not yet reached level 6, he had already mastered the first Asura skill, and the ability to penetrate deeper into the wasteland and fight high-level monsters accelerated his progress. Meanwhile, Aunt Wong finally changed her mind about the young man, saying that it was Zing who raised their reputation. Otherwise, Yecheng would have continued to be looked down upon. However, Ziying's success did not please Yukai's subordinate, and despite the order not to touch the youth without good reason, he decided to get into his mind using his abilities. Ziying had already suspected that this might happen, and because the skill upgrade had increased his perception of the opponent's spiritual power, he was not worried. Since Yukai's subordinate had spiritual powers, he wanted to confirm whether Ziying was really an ordinary youth. He wasn't even stopped by the words of the level 5 soldier who also obeyed Yukai. In the end, he still tried to use his abilities on the young man, even despite Yukai's prohibition to do so without his knowledge. Ziying felt the spiritual attacks, but as expected with his current level, such minor attempts did not pose a threat. Moreover, the young man decided to test his new skill, and now his opponent was trapped. At first, everything around was plunged into darkness, but in an instant it was replaced by a bright and colorful picture. However, this colorful picture did not bring goodness, but only darkness and destruction. Yukai's subordinate failed to do anything. Ziying penetrated his mind and took control over him. The youth possessed spiritual power fueled by demonic energy, so powerful that the enemy did not have a single chance to resist. After that, he went crazy and started behaving strangely, running in circles and shouting that he was the real boss and that all the money in the world would be his. The soldier nearby realized that he had gone mad, probably due to the effects of the remaining spiritual energy. He realized that such words and actions could undermine Yukai's authority, so he decided to try to bring him to his senses with a strong blow. He then approached Ziying, and since he showed no signs of life, he thought that the young man was also dead. After this, the soldier went to Yukai to report what had happened, and to say that the young man was no longer of use. However, he had no idea that Ziying was actually much more capable than he seemed, and possessed incredible strength. After all this monster-slaying marathon, Ziying needed some rest, and without noticing it, he slept for more than 2 days. Meanwhile, Aunt Wong sent everyone to continue working because if everything was okay with the young man, they needed to hurry, otherwise they might not make it in time. Ziying asked her if Yukai had sent more monsters, but Wong replied that no. It was just that half of their people had been transferred to other training grounds, and the amount of ammunition for the front line had been doubled. In addition, the 9th defensive line was destroyed, and humanity finally retreated to the 8th. The battles were fierce, and neither in the sky nor on the ground could the military be compared to the high-level monsters. Even the Thunder Strongman who reached level 7 lost his arm, and the Fire Giant who reached level 6 died heroically. Ziying knew they would fall, but he didn't think it would happen so quickly, even faster than in his past life. Aunt Wong also said that a verdict had already been reached regarding the skirmish between him and the officer. The higher-ups had decided that the officer was under the influence of a mental attack, and that the training ground was not at fault. However, there was something else she wanted to tell, and she confided it to Liu. Liu said that all the workers who supported Ziying unanimously elected him as the head of the testing ground at the Yecheng branch of the Judicial Tower. Ziying was shocked and didn't know how to react or whether to sign the appointment document. Nevertheless, he still agreed, and from now on he was called neither master nor boy, but chief. Liu also said that the tasks set by management had become much more difficult, and the number of workers had halved, while the required ammunition was even greater. Besides, the workers couldn't last long without food, water, and sleep, so Liu asked Ziying what they should do now. Ziying understood that the workers could not do better, and the only one who could increase productivity was himself, relying only on his own abilities. This way, even if the workers took frequent breaks, it wouldn't affect the completion time of the tasks, and when the resources were depleted, He could easily deal with Yukai in his new position. Liu said that in such a situation she should contact her superiors, but Zing replied that he had already thought of something. He immediately got out of bed and Liu tried to stop him, saying that he needed time to recover. However, Zing exceeded their expectations and stood confidently on his feet as if nothing had happened. But suddenly he noticed a strange silhouette, as if someone had rushed past at incredible speed. Zing decided to follow this silhouette and immediately ran in that direction. So he found himself on the street, but there was no one around, and he began to think that he had lost the trail. However, just when he thought he had missed the silhouette, a girl appeared behind him, put a gun to the back of his head and said that she would ask questions, and that he had better answer correctly. She asked him what the next batch of goods for the order he took from Yukai was, and also who would deliver this batch to him, they or he himself. Ziying replied that it would be better for her to find out about this from Yukai himself and his subordinates. The girl was sure that he was also subordinate to him, and the moment she let her guard down, Ziying took advantage of this by using Asura's talent. However, he was unable to knock the gun out of her hands. After all, the girl had some skills, but he managed to block her shot. Ziying said that he did not obey Yukai, to which the girl asked him why he was helping him then. The young man replied that he was not helping him at all. He was simply carrying out the task that was entrusted to him in Yecheng. And besides, even if he was a monster and a traitor, he had no choice but to refuse. The girl noted that the young man seemed to know about Yukai's dirty deeds and suggested that he join forces with her and deal with Yukai together, introducing herself as Zhang Yuan from the reconnaissance squad of the 2nd Supply Department of the 8th Defensive Line. And despite all her expectations, Ziying immediately responded that he was refusing her offer. Yuan then asked him if he had really decided to act in concert with Yukai. But Zing replied that it wasn't like that. He just wanted to deal with Yukai personally, but not now and not with her. The young man noted that Yuan probably didn't think about the consequences, because if she wanted to get rid of Yukai, she had two options, either an assassination attempt or a denunciation. However, if she kills him, how can she be sure that she will not be turned in? And if the assassination attempt is completely unsuccessful, is she ready to bear the consequences? In addition, if they do try to expose Yukai now, then this investigation will clearly be delayed due to the war, and humanity is just suffering another serious defeat. In simple terms, attempts to report on Yutsai could be seen as internal disunity, and thus a chain reaction would be launched that would lead to chaos throughout the entire rear. However, Yuan didn't like Ziying's plan to deal with Yukai alone, as she believed that he wouldn't be able to handle it himself, as he was just a deserter. Ziying took her words as an attempt to measure strength, so he said that he wouldn't mind finding out right now which of them was more suitable for the role of Yukai's killer. This made Yuan wary, and the aura emanating from Ziying couldn't help but be frightening. The young man also said that if she had offered to fight him a week ago, he would have probably refused, and this gave the girl some thoughts. Meanwhile, Ziying said that it seemed like they had already said everything they wanted to each other, so he would deal with Yukai alone from now on. Yuan decided to back down and trust Ziying, reminding him that he had no room for error. However, Ziying had something he wanted to ask Yuan for. He needed help in obtaining new mutant beasts. Yuan asked him how many more monsters he needed, because with his current strength, he definitely couldn't be called a weakling, even on the real battlefield, and he was constantly pumping up his strength, but he was hiding, which made her wary. But Ziying assured her that she had nothing to worry about, because no matter what, he was fighting on the side of the people, but he still lacked the strength to save humanity. Yuan thought Ziying was quite suspicious, but despite this, she trusted him. A couple of days later, Ziying again completed the task brilliantly and raised his authority in the eyes of others even more. Yukai decided to immediately assign him a new task, but this time it would be monsters of the 5th level. Meanwhile, Liu asked him if he was afraid of fighting level 5 monsters, since he was all wounded after fighting level 4 creatures. But the young man assured her that everything would be fine. The young man's confidence also pleasantly surprised Yukai because Ziying was not only smarter than his previous officer, but also took less money for the work. In addition, the battles on the front lines became more difficult and orders for supplies increased several times, and this was only to Yutsai's advantage. Yukai told the young man that he had great hopes for him, and if he needed anything, he could always turn to him. And if he completed a couple more of these tasks, he would personally present him and his training ground with medals. But Zing decided not to answer Yukai, and instead ordered Liu and the others to continue working. Yukai was also pleasantly surprised when he observed the working atmosphere at the training ground, and this gave him confidence. However, he had no idea that his so-called talisman would actually turn out to be a knife stuck in his back. After some time, Zing went out to exterminate monsters, and this time he decided to use his new skill, Evil Blade. He cut down the monsters one after another, and the source stones needed to level up Asura fell like millions. On March 20th, fierce battles took place on the 8th line of defense of the Orlov country. About 800,000 soldiers were lost, and another 50,000 soldiers with superpowers, and all this in 4 hours. On March 22nd, the 8th defensive line of the northern glacier cracked, and 10 alien races broke through. 60 warships fell in battle. On March 24th, the 8th line of defense of the southern glacier was attacked by a race of mutant steel wolves, and in just an hour, 50 native fighters were killed. On March 26th, the 8th defense line in France and the 8th defense line in Kawasaki fell in just half an hour. Meanwhile, Zing was able to obtain the maximum level of the Asura talent tree. Now the young man could transform into a fierce demon and destroy monsters even faster and in greater numbers. And what's more, finally confront Yukai. The power that Zing had come to possess was truly devastating. The difference in strength between the maximum level and the previous levels was simply colossal. Meanwhile, the situation in the world was getting worse every day. At the moment, only the Eastern Union, the USA, and Russia remain on the 8th line of defense and stubbornly defend themselves, while the Eastern Union again announced mobilization, lowering the draft age to 16 years. Zing didn't expect that humanity would start to move towards defeat so quickly, and despite his talent as an Asura, that alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to come up with a new plan to become even stronger. Meanwhile, he finally decided to deal with Yutsai and asked him to help drive the steel wolves out of the southern glacier. Yukai decided not to refuse him, offering his help as a reward for the young man's efforts. However, Zing did not want Yukai to suspect him of anything, so he decided to pretend to be his subject until the very end. After which they went to the southern glacier. Meanwhile, Zing remembered his past life, and according to his guess, with the awakening of superpowers in people, the plan of all races to eliminate them will soon be launched. This in turn meant that the young man now had to act more carefully, and in the meantime, his beast tamer level had reached 7th. In addition, he had managed to tame 1,000 mutant steel wolves. Meanwhile, Yukai and the rest of his team went to the southern glacier, as Zing had previously asked him to do. Yukai didn't worry about anything because despite the fact that there were wolves there, he wanted to quickly finish them off by teleporting to the nano chamber. But suddenly his plan failed. There were too many monsters and they all surrounded Yukai's cars. He began to panic and ordered to immediately teleport him to a safe place. But teleportation is only possible over a distance of 1 kilometer, and the wolves stretched for dozens. Therefore, the only way out for Yukai was to go forward without stopping. And by that time, Zing, who had planned all of this, had already approached them. Following this, the young man activated the talent Taming and managed to tame more than 100,000 wolves, after which the monsters suddenly stopped, and Yukai thought that there was a tamer ahead who helped them. But he had no idea that this tamer was actually Zing, and that he didn't want to save them, but on the contrary, tear them to shreds. After this, the wolves headed in a pack towards Yutsai's convoy. Fearing nothing, they began to attack them. The situation was critical, and the only thing Yukai's soldier could do at that moment was to try to send them to a safe place. But there was one problem. The nano camera did not work at such a long distance, so they were teleported to the fortress of the ancient city. However, as soon as they teleported, Zing was already waiting for them at that place. Yukai was confused. Did the young man really want to try to kill him? He declared that if Zing laid a finger on him, he and his family would die in terrible agony. But Zing assured him that he would not give him such a chance. At that very moment, Yukai's soldier wanted to teleport him back and save him. However, he failed to do so, as Zing then took the form of Asura and was able to repel the power of the soldier Yukai. He then finished him off without any difficulty, killing him with just one powerful blow, after which he threw Yukai into the abyss of the canyon, and he only shouted at the end that the young man was a traitor and a deserter. And in the meantime, to prevent Yukai from miraculously surviving and his body from being found, Zing sent a couple of mutant wolves after him. The energy coming from Yecheng was so powerful that even the Bureau of Research on People with Supernormal Abilities noticed it. In particular, the 5th-level Asura superhuman, Su Leng, became interested in this and wanted to report this anomaly to the Research Bureau. Meanwhile, Zing was thinking about what to do with the 100,000 mutant wolves, and after a while he decided to give them the order to bring him the source stones from the north of the Gobi Desert. Zing looked like the leader of a pack of mutant wolves, and yet he was glad that he had such an army. Upon returning to the Yecheng training ground, Yuan approached Ziying and told him that Yu Kai and his team had encountered a pack of mutant wolves in the northern wasteland yesterday, and none of them had survived. Yuan asked the young man if this was all his doing, and if so, how did he manage to do it? Ziying merely replied that he had simply asked them to deliver him a couple of mutant wolves. Yuan was even more surprised to learn that the young man could control the monsters. But Ziying preferred to keep it a secret and asked Yuan not to tell anyone about it. Meanwhile, Yuan also said that she had already handed over all the evidence of Yukai's fraud this morning, and most likely his property would soon be confiscated. Yuan offered to buy Ziying a drink as thanks for eliminating Yukai, but the young man replied that he was not in the mood for drinking yet. However, instead, Ziying wanted to ask her for something else that she could use to thank him. Ziying wanted to make the training ground the largest slaughterhouse in Yecheng, one that would accept hundreds of times more monsters than other training grounds, and Yuan replied that she could help him with that. The next day, Ziying, without wasting a minute, went to exterminate monsters in his new slaughterhouse. For killing a bunch of monsters, he earned a lot of source stones, which were necessary for leveling up. In addition, very soon he will be able to acquire a 1,000,000-strong army of steel wolves. After some time, Zing raised his beast tamer level to 8th and his taming level to 6th. And in addition, he managed to obtain almost 2 million source stones. By heading north to the Gobi Desert, Ziying was able to greatly increase his strength, raising his skill levels and stats. And now, his army of mutant wolves consists of 500,000 individuals. After that, he went to the Baigu Valley, where the 6th-level fire yaks lived. The young man also wanted to tame them, to make them valuable soldiers for his beast army. Taking control of them, he ordered them to guard the Baigu Valley, bring him source stones, not eat people, and not terrorize cities. Afterwards, Ziying went to the ravine of the canyon, and he wanted to spend the remaining 1,000,000 source stones on a batch of level 7 mutants from the ravine. The 7th-level monsters were superior to the fire yaks and steel wolves, and although the difference in level was not too big, they were significantly faster and had a stronger aura. Ziying thought that he would be able to tame them without any difficulty, just like he had with the previous monsters. However, at some point everything went wrong, and he was unable to tame the new animals the first time. However, this was not a problem for Ziying, as he was not against fighting using the skill Asura Berserker. But as soon as he dealt with the army of monkeys, the Monkey King, who was at least level 9, immediately emerged from the lair. Despite its size, it was quite fast and much stronger than the previous monsters. Although Zing was able to become several times stronger, the 9th-level monster still made him sweat a lot. In addition, the Monkey King considered him weak and did not want to obey. Ziying decided to stop standing on ceremony with him, and using Asura's Hell on Earth mode, show the monster the difference in their strength. At the same time, the Superhuman and Paranormal Research Bureau was monitoring the recent situation in Yecheng. Leng was sure that she saw a strange flow of powerful energy near Yecheng, so she continued to watch carefully. At this moment, Leng noticed strange vibrations in the southwest of Yecheng, in the area of the Canyon Gorge. She immediately told Zhao Care, a level 5 Asura ESP user, to prepare to track down the energy source. Care immediately put her skills to use to keep track of what was happening in the canyon as quickly as possible, and what she saw shocked her. In front of her, she saw the real demon Asura, who had entered a stream of rage and was mercilessly cutting up the Monkey King. The girl was not only extremely surprised by this, but also lost consciousness for a few seconds. Lan asked what she saw there, but due to the strong fear, Kir could not really explain anything, only said that she saw the demon Asura. Meanwhile, there was no living place left on the Monkey King. Ziying fought so fiercely that he completely forgot his main goal. In any case, in the end, the Monkey King still bowed his head and went over to Ziying's side. Meanwhile, he also gave orders to the monkeys, declaring that they were now subject only to the Monkey King and were to remain in the Canyon Gorge, mining source stones for him. In addition, all they have to do is wait for further orders, and of course, they are forbidden to touch people and attack cities. Meanwhile, Lan and Care discussed what had happened, and Lan told her partner that she had felt another flow of energy the previous night. However, Care was unable to test this, as she could only use her ability once a day and only for 3 seconds. But Len said that she didn't mean that at all, but was saying that both of these energies could come from one person. Kier asked her how this was possible since they had been monitoring the Eastern Esper Alliance for many years, and the top 10 places in their ranking system had always remained a mystery, and no one knew their names until now. However, such wild and powerful energy of Asura led them to think that most likely it was someone from these 10. After the incident, rumors and news began to spread that a mysterious man in a black cloak with deadly power had appeared in the Canyon Gorge and had taken 10th place in the Eastern Esper Alliance rankings. But no one could even imagine that this someone would turn out to be the well-known deserter and coward Zing. Meanwhile, the US and Russia's 8th line defenses were completely destroyed, and in order to protect China, the Eastern Alliance launched a policy of full roll call of veterans for the 5th line defense. Meanwhile, Zing's father wrote to him asking him to drop by his house for dinner, as he, his mother, and his sister missed him very much. However, it was not only his family that was waiting for him at home. Reporters also came there, or more precisely to his father, Nan Xiangshan, to take a short interview about the veterans call-up. One of the Eastern Alliance reporters was Fang Shan, and the first thing she asked Xiangshan was what he was thinking when he signed his name right after he heard about the conscription. Xiangshan replied that he considered it his duty, and Shang then asked him what he thought of his son Zing and his refusal to go to the front lines. It was a rather provocative question, and Xiangshan did not want to answer it. However, at this point, the interview was interrupted by his wife and daughter, who came home and, along with them, his well-known son. Xiangshan's wife, also Zing's mother, Qing Suimei, was a volunteer at the factory. They also had a daughter, Zing's sister, Nan Zishan, who was a medical esper. Xiangshan also said that although Zing did not go to the front lines, he works hard at the training ground to ensure that the front lines have the necessary resources. So, in his eyes, he will always be a good son. Shang decided to change the target's priority from Xiangshan to Zing, sharply asking him if he had any comments regarding the fact that the 8th line of defense had fallen. And along with it, his friends and classmates had most likely died. Xiangshan did not tolerate such accusations against his son, and said that when he was called to sign the contract, they initially wanted to send him to the 6th line. But he volunteered to fight on the front lines, so her accusations were meaningless. Moreover, Zishan said that she was also ready to go to the front lines, had already volunteered as a medical volunteer for the 7th line of defense, and Zuomei was also ready to go with her. Ziying also did not remain silent and stated that in that case he would go to the front lines with them. This put some pressure on the young man, so he even decided to skip the family dinner, explaining that he needed to sort out some things. Xiangshan didn't question his son or try to persuade him to stay, as he was glad that they had at least seen each other. After this, Ziying went to the wild coastal forests, where he intended to tame war elephants. The elephants were much larger than the monkeys, wolves, and fire yaks, but no less strong. However, even so, Ziying did not have any particular difficulties in taming them, and the young man decided not to delay this matter. In a matter of minutes, Ziying was able to tame the war elephants and take control of them, making them part of his beast army. After some time, he gathered the remaining war elephants that lived in the forest. He ordered the monsters to remain in the wild coastal forests to mine source stones for him, to await further orders and not to attack people or cities. As a result, the young man was able to raise the level of the beast tamer to 8th, the level of tamed beasts to 7th, increase the number of tamed monsters to 3 million individuals, and was able to activate the formation tree. After that, Ziying went to Yecheng's training ground to get as many source stones as possible. He managed to obtain 100,000 stones, for which 10,000 formations became available to him, and the first thing the young man decided to try out was the sword energy formation. Soon, a powerful energy began to accumulate around him, which seemed to strengthen him with every second. However, Ziying decided not to stop at the first level sword energy formation and used 2,000 of these formations at once. The strength that Ziying now possessed became simply indescribably powerful, and fighting monsters became even easier for him. An hour had passed since he had discovered the formations. The number of formations had reached 10,000. The ability level had risen to the 2nd level, and the youth had access to the formations of Strengthening Evil Spirit and Sword Energy. Each formation required a base consumption of 20 origin stones, but the main advantage was that their power accumulated infinitely, and to level up, 500,000 formations were required. In the morning, Liu arrived at the site and noticed Wang and Zhang standing next to the open door, noting that Ziying must have worked all night again. Wang said it was most likely because of the journalists, since it was because of them that he returned to the training ground immediately after dinner. The internet continued to vigorously discuss Ziying, calling him a spineless coward and saying that even his father had gone to the front, while he had decided to sit back in the rear. At this moment, Ziying came to Liu and the others to tell them something. He came to talk before he went to the front lines himself, but something unexpected happened. Ziying also received a letter from his father and was quite alarmed when he first opened it. Father wrote the letter in advance before he went to the front with his sister, and when Ziying received it, they were already there. In the letter, the father wrote to Ziying that he loved him as his own son, respected his every choice, appreciated his courage, although he did not understand what the young man was planning, and also asked him to protect his mother, who remained in Yiqing. Reading his father's letter, Ziying could hardly contain his emotions from crying, but it served as motivation for him to move forward. Meanwhile, the other participants of the training ground were unhappy with Ziying's decision. They did not understand why the young man wanted to close the unfulfilled tasks of other training grounds. But Ziying assured them that everything was fine, and also wanted to clarify the situation regarding the latest announcement about the emergence of a new fifth line of defense. The young man warned everyone that he would go there as the chief engineer. However, no one should worry about the operation of their landfill because, as before, it will function at full capacity. At this time, another army of soldiers was sent to the front lines to fight monsters. Ziying could have joined them too, but his father's words convinced him not to do so, because if the young man went to the front now, it would be absolutely useless. A new race of monsters, the Ascended, are non-carbon-based beings whose bodies cannot be used to extract energy sources, so Ziying would not be able to gain a boost there. As these creatures summoned more and more of their own kind, growing stronger with each passing second, even with Ziying's powers, humanity didn't have a chance now. Therefore, there was only one way out now, to focus on creating a fifth line of defense which would become the final battlefield between humans and monsters. Meanwhile, a senior engineer named Li was already on the fifth defensive line. Li was confident that their new 10-meter thick, 300-kilometer-long outer steel wall would hold off the monsters. But Ziying warned him that even such a structure would not be able to hold back the creature's attack. The real power that could wipe out monsters was the formations, and to create them, a huge amount of origin stones were required, which is what Ziying decided to do in the coming days. The youth went to the wasteland located between Yiqing and the fifth line of defense to try out new formations. Ziying opened a new fire formation that could summon 50,000 formations at once and strengthen them. The strength of this formation was truly indescribable, but Ziying had yet to master it and refine it properly. Using his new power, Ziying mined the nearest 10 kilometers with fire formations to at least slightly slow down the advance of the low-level ascended ones. The young man decided that the formations would be ideal for mining the 30-kilometer-long first defensive line of Yiqing in order to somehow hold back the monsters. The next day, Li asked Ziying to watch the news, where there was a lot of talk about how the recently introduced fifth line of defense plan in Yiqing had proven useless on the battlefield. Public comments also left much to be desired, with many beginning to believe that the young man was wasting the country's money and resources. However, Ziying was not worried about this, and Li asked to continue working while he developed a new defense plan. However, Ziying already had his own plan. The recently erected steel wall was just a trap, after passing through which the monsters would lose their vigilance and not notice the formations. In addition, Ziying had thought of another way to use the formations. Even though his elemental talents and forbidden spells tree had not yet awakened, the young man was already making a plan for the future. He asked Engineer Li to build 2 moats along the entire steel wall, one in front and one in the back, filling the front moat with water and the back moat with oil. So when the Ascended attack, the army will run electricity through the wall, the water will conduct the current, and those who break through the wall will find themselves on fire. Engineer Li was pleasantly surprised and hurried to report Ziying's plan to the entire city. In these few days, Ziying had already managed to accumulate 9 million origin stones thanks to the monsters he had tamed and had also reached level 4. However, even such a seemingly huge number of stones still remained insufficient. Meanwhile, as Ziying went further to strengthen the formations, he noticed a strange aura that resembled that of the Ascended ones. Apart from this aura, Ziying also felt a strong human energy, as if an Esper had been attacked somewhere. At the same time, a rare event occurred in the Chu clan. One of the heirs was able to exit the hermitage ritual 2 years early, although he had previously stated that he would need at least 12 years, which greatly surprised the patriarch Chu Changhong. This genius turned out to be Chu Xinghe, the 307th generation Esper of the Chu clan, who explained his early return by sensing an incredibly powerful energy from the northwestern border. Chang Hong was shocked because usually there was dead silence on the northwestern border. Xinghe stated that he wanted to go there personally to find out what exactly had happened, but Chang Hong tried to dissuade him since the Ascended Ones resided there. However, Xinghe replied that as long as the war was going on, the whole world was one continuous danger. An hour later, Xinghe reached the border and was shocked to see the formation set up, not believing that this was the work of one person. As soon as he let his guard down for even a moment, one of the monsters immediately attacked him. It was an ascended monster nicknamed Steel Assassin, also known as Subject 3578. In addition to the Steel Assassin, there was another ascended one there, the Rotten Giant, Object 1324. The two monsters had only one goal, to kill Xinghe at any cost, so they united. But Xinghe was not weak either, as he was a level 10 Esper, and after activating the skill Territory Control, he attacked them with the Thousand Sword Energy technique. At this time, Zing was surprised at how quickly events were unfolding in this reality, because in his past life, the strongest Espers remained anonymous until the 12th year of the Great War, and their appearance then gave the desperate humanity its last hope. In that life, the desperate struggle of the united people lasted for another 8 years, until humanity fell in the 20th year of the Great War. But this time, Zing intended to prevent such an outcome and gather the strongest Espers to his side. Meanwhile, Xinghe continued to fight hard against two Ascended Ones at once. His strength and skills were barely enough to hold his own against such monsters. Xinghe did not want to accept such an outcome, and was determined that if he was destined to die, then at least he would take one of his enemies with him. However, at that moment, Zing arrived, and managed to pull the guy out of the bloody battle. Xinghe was surprised by Zing's appearance and said that he could still fight, and Zing replied that in that case he would take on the Steel Assassin, and Xinghe should distract the Rotten Giant. The boys then rushed into battle, but they had to act in a coordinated and careful manner since both Ascended Ones were high-ranking. However, Ziying did not feel any fear or uncertainty. On the contrary, he considered the monster a gift from fate to test his new formation on. He activated the third-level formation, Evil Thorns, but it wasn't enough, so he then activated 50,000 of those formations, as well as 50,000 ice ones. Xinghe was amazed by Ziying's strength and the power of his formations, noting that they were much stronger than the ones he had seen in the wasteland before. After this, Zing was able to freeze the Steel Assassin and temporarily remove him from the battle. Now the main threat was the Rotten Giant, which was difficult for Xinghe to deal with. Ziying decided not to stand aside and help, using the skill Asura Berserk, which made Xinghe even more surprised. Could the guy in front of him really be that mysterious Esper from the top 10? However, Zing didn't want to kill the monster alone. He wanted to let Xinghe practice on him, because he had potential, but he had yet to fully reveal it. Ziying wondered what would happen if he used the strengthening formation on a person, and without thinking twice, he used it on Xinghe. After using the tenfold amplification formation, Xinghe lost consciousness for a while, and Ziying immediately received a warning from the system that the human body could only withstand a tenfold amplification, and that exceeding it would result in death. Ziying thought that he would now have to fight alone, but at that moment something strange happened. A bright purple glow appeared in the sky. The source of this glow turned out to be Xinghe, who was able to awaken after being strengthened tenfold and immediately began to attack the monster. At that moment, the Steel Assassin also emerged from his icy confinement. Ziying decided not to hesitate and immediately used 4th-level lightning energy against him. Following this, a stream of powerful energy force rushed towards the monster, which was enough to finally finish him off. Aside from the Steel Assassin, the Rotten Giant was also defeated, and thus Ziying and Xinghe were able to defeat the two ascended monsters. Afterwards, Xinghe expressed his gratitude to Ziying for saving his life and teaching him an invaluable lesson, declaring that the Chu clan would always serve him from now on and called him master. At the same time, he asked him if he was hiding for the time being, because as is known, the main goal of all humanity is to defeat the Ascended Ones, and he certainly didn't just place so many formations nearby for no reason. Xinghe also asked if his last name started with the letter N. Ziying was confused and didn't know what to answer since he wanted to remain anonymous. But Xinghe pointed out that if you add up his abnormal abilities and his online chatter, it all fit together. Xinghe knew so much about him that it began to frighten Ziying, but nevertheless he felt that he was treated with respect. Meanwhile, Xinghe stated that he wanted to go to the 7th line of defense on behalf of the entire Chu clan, firstly out of personal desire, and secondly to buy more time for Zing and his plan. Zing was pleasantly surprised by this meeting and replied that he would think about it, warning that the 7th line was much more dangerous than anywhere else, and he needed him alive, so he must definitely survive. But Xinghe replied that he himself understood this perfectly well, so he would definitely survive and protect everyone. Ziying thanked him for his understanding and asked him to take him to their clan, as he wanted to make a few more enhancements for him before leaving. Meanwhile, Xinghe told Ziying about his younger sister, noting that although she doesn't speak, she already has serious teleportation abilities. Meanwhile, the news was talking about how the Wu clan's young genius had risen to a new level and had managed to kill a level 10 ascended rotten giant, ranking 9th in the top espers. Meanwhile, Ziying met Xinghe's younger sister, Chu Tian, and was surprised because he didn't think she was so much younger than her brother. Despite her age, Tian was already ranked 12th in the top espers, and her ability to teleport was indeed extremely useful. Thanks to her ability, Ziying will be able to control every polygon even while on the 5th line, and at this rate, he will no longer have to hide his 4th ability, Summon Undead. Afterwards, he met with Yuan, who was surprised by his words about being able to fight on the front lines and monitor 20 training grounds at the same time. Ziying asked her not to worry about it, but instead to make sure he got permission for all of this. Yuan noted that although this is madness, given the current situation at the front and in the rear, it will not be a problem. She also couldn't help but notice how much Ziying's strength had increased since their last meeting. And meanwhile, she wondered why he chose to hide in the rear instead of fighting on the front lines. Meanwhile, Zing was happy about how quickly he could level up now, thanks to Tian's teleportation skill. After that, he went to improve his skills, and by that time, had already managed to accumulate about 100 million source stones. Following this, Zing and Tian moved to the Qin Imperial Tomb, which was located 100 kilometers away from the southern glacier. However, Tian was unable to move them to the desired location the first time, and Ziying realized that her ability, like everyone else's, also had a limit. However, after several more teleportations, they still moved to the Qin tomb. Ziying wanted to tell her to move to a safe place, but Tian was much smarter than her brother and immediately hid. At this time, the young man used the ability Summon Undead and went to explore the tomb. However, the tomb exceeded all the young man's expectations. Something strange began to happen at once, and a bright glow appeared everywhere. The Tomb Emperor himself, Yingzheng, who was on the 10th level, suddenly appeared in front of him. Ziying was struck by his aura, which even after hundreds of years remained truly amazing. This is what it means to be the greatest of emperors. However, the youth's goal was not to fight him, but to ask for help, explaining that their world would soon fall without support, and begged him to honor him by sharing his strength and army. However, Zheng considered his request impudent and immediately attacked him in response, declaring that the young man would have to fight him and prove his strength. The emperor was confident that Ziying would not be able to even strike, but he exceeded all his expectations. However, Zheng was not going to give in either and decided to show his true strength. He summoned the great dragon slayer with his skill and aimed it at the boy. Ziying did not remain in debt and used Asura's skill, Demon Slayer, but it was not enough to stop the emperor's power. Then the young man activated Asura's skill, Hell on Earth, and this alone was able to hold back the onslaught, allowing the Dragon Slayer to be destroyed. Zheng was so amazed by Ziying's power that he admitted defeat, noting that another such explosion would destroy the entire tomb. However, before handing over his army, he asked the young man to tell him everything, because he himself had been in ignorance for more than 100 years. After Ziying explained everything, Zheng gave him the Tiger Talisman, which could instantly summon the Emperor's army. Ziying decided to test the talisman right away to make sure it worked. After the talisman was activated, the Emperor's vast army rose up, and now the Summon Undead ability numbered around 10 million warriors. In addition, the young man discovered the Tree of Forbidden Elemental Spells, but to improve it, Source Stones were required. At this moment, Ziying was overcome by a strange premonition, as if there were steel assassins nearby, and they attacked two young espers at once in different places. Realizing that he could not cope alone, he turned to Zheng, and the emperor immediately summoned his two strongest subordinates, Wang Jian and Meng Tian, ordering them to destroy the invaders. Ziying asked Zheng to go with them to the east, while he himself was going to move to the west. At the same time, 20 kilometers east of the Qin Empire tombs in the wild wasteland, one of the young espers was fighting against a crowd of monsters. It was an esper from the Su clan, the Ghostmaster Su Chang'e, who had a very peculiar character. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority, he continued to fight back and resist. The battle was very difficult, and at times he even used monsters as cover. But the Steel Assassin didn't care who he hit, even if it was his ally. The battle soon changed, and it was no longer Chang'e fighting monsters, but monsters fighting each other. However, the Steel Assassin was much stronger than ordinary monsters, and it was not difficult for him to cut down any of them. Chang'e was almost resigned to defeat, but at that moment Zheng appeared, declaring that he had come to save him. The battle immediately changed, and soon there was no trace left of the monsters. At the same time, 20 kilometers from the tombs of the Qin Empire in the Wild Wasteland, two young espers were fighting. Brother and sister Qin Sui and Qin Ying, both possessing plant summoning magic and being the heirs of the Qin clan. They found themselves in a hopeless situation, surrounded by monsters, and Ying asked Sui to run away while he held off the enemies. But Sui refused to leave her brother, and at that moment a crowd of steel assassins fell upon them. The monsters were able to injure Sui, which sent Ying into an indescribable rage, and his anger was combined with the desire to avenge his sister. He instantly forgot about fear and despair, guided only by anger and his own strength. At that moment, Zing arrived, and with a powerful blow he pushed back several monsters. Zing immediately ordered Tian to teleport all the Ascended Ones a kilometer further south, and at that moment, all the monsters disappeared. It was a really impressive appearance, and besides, Zing had a small gift for Sui and Ying. Just as he had previously strengthened Xinghe and Tian, he now gave a tenfold boost to Sui and Ying. With new powers, it became much easier for the two young espers to fight the crowd of monsters, despite their numbers. Zing himself also did not stand aside and helped the guys by using his new forbidden spell, Ball Lightning. Sui and Ying were amazed by Zing's destructive power, and although he told them to take half of the monsters on themselves, it seemed like there would soon be nothing left for them. The young man himself was also surprised, because he did not expect that the forbidden spell would be so strong. Zing then began to destroy the Steel Assassins using another new spell. This time it was the forbidden spell, Earth Elemental, amplified 50 times. Sui and Ying were doubly surprised to see another spell from Zing, and couldn't believe that someone so strong was fighting by their side. After the battle, the guys thanked him on behalf of the entire Qin clan and expressed their gratitude for saving them. In addition, they declared that their lives now belonged to him, and they were always ready to carry out any of his orders. Zing was surprised and asked if they really knew who he was since they were talking about orders, but the guys replied that they were seeing him for the first time. However, this was only a plus for Zing, and he noted to himself that it would be better if it remained like this. By that time, the emperor and his subordinates had joined them, and along with them, Chang'e. Chang'e expressed his gratitude and appreciation for Zing's help, noting that he was now indebted to him. Meanwhile, Zing asked all the espers to send him to their clan residences so that he could use the collective enhancement. Chang'e was confused about what kind of enhancement he was talking about, and Zing immediately enhanced it by answering his question. Ying stated that he was willing to do anything for Zing, which made the young man think that perhaps he should send them all to the front lines. But he decided that it was too early and simply told them to be careful. At this time, Chang'e came out of the enhancement effect and asked Zing what he was up to, since he was always acting secretly and wearing a mask. He also summoned an entire army of undead to protect them and their homes, yet asked for nothing in return, causing Chang'e to wonder if they were really that useless to him. Or perhaps the young man simply wants to remain a mysterious hero in a dark cloak. Zing replied that they now needed to go to the 7th line of defense, where their main task was to hold out for a few days because the front line was now much more dangerous than it seemed. Meanwhile, Ziying placed Shi Huang's 10 million strong army of soldiers under the command of Chang'e. Meanwhile, news spread that the top Esper heirs from the Inner Su and Qin clans would be leading their clans to the 7th line of defense. In addition, it became known that 3 young espers died immediately after their appearance. Ziying noticed that life today was very different from before. Events were moving faster, and new esper heirs were appearing much faster. Moreover, even if he rushed towards them at top speed, there was no certainty that he would be able to save everyone. So instead of putting out the fires, he decided to find and eliminate their source. So Ziying decided to go to the northern wasteland because 5 great espers were already on his side, which meant that humanity would soon be able to turn the tide of the war. Ziying and Tian traveled to the Han Dynasty tomb, where the young man intended to meet the ancestors of the Great Dynasty. Since he had already subjugated the Qin Dynasty, It was not difficult for him to subjugate the Han dynasty, and now 10 million soldiers fought on his side, 20,000 of whom he immediately sent to the northern wasteland. With such destructive power and reliable support, the young man decided to take action instead of sitting back. The next time Zing activated Asura's skills, he was immediately noticed by the Paranormal Research and Supervision Center. Moreover, this time his energy was many times more powerful than before, and Lan immediately wanted to report this to the military. Meanwhile, Ziying, using his new powers, covered the entire nearby area with defensive formations against monsters. Lan was amazed that in addition to Asura's demonic energy, formation magic was also used here, and Kier wanted to make sure if this was really the mysterious Esper from the top. But she had already spent all her energy. At this time, Ziying was already calling on the warriors of the Han dynasty, ordering them to destroy all enemies. He even managed to subjugate the strongest warriors of the Han, Wei Qing, Emperor Wu, and Huo Qibing. From such a powerful energy, Len almost lost consciousness and could not believe her eyes. It was difficult for her to even evaluate such power on their 10-point scale, so she declared it to be divine level. Ziying continued to develop his strength and used the forbidden spell Ball Lightning, strengthening it 100-fold. From such power, it was as if a second sun appeared in the sky, blinding everyone so much that in an instant day turned to night. The light was so bright that all the residents of the nearby cities were dumbfounded with amazement. This caused concern among the army, and soon some troops were sent into the northern wasteland for reconnaissance. The young man did not stop and summoned 500,000 steel wolves, fire yaks, and in addition, 1,000,000 war elephants and giant monkeys. This sight left absolutely everyone at a loss, and meanwhile Su Xiaonan and Chen Lianyi, who had been saved by Ziying earlier, began to wonder if all this had really been arranged by that very young man who was capable of taming steel wolves. Yuan was of the same opinion and could not believe that such power belonged to Ziying alone. Ziying managed to arouse the interest of not only those who had met him before, but also complete strangers, such as the Esper Lan Changkong from the East Sea, home of the Lan clan. Besides Changkong, other clans also became interested in him: Zhuge, Xuanyuan, Huang, Yu, and even Xu. Ziying was delighted. He had managed to not only create a commotion to attract monsters, but also gather many successor Espers that he could strengthen. Meanwhile, one of the Huang clan's Esper heirs, Huang Xuan, found himself in a difficult situation and was surrounded by ascended monsters. When he already thought that it was all over for him, suddenly a miracle happened. The monsters began to retreat. In fact, this was only the beginning of a battle within the great battle organized by Ziying. After this, a fierce battle began between the ascended monsters and Ziying's army, on whose side the undead and beasts fought. The battle turned out to be truly brutal, with an incredible number of opponents participating on both sides. Ziying strengthened his beasts and undead, and as he expected, it gave a significant boost in strength. However, despite the strengthening, everyone except the king was still inferior in strength to the ascended ones. So Ziying gave orders to the monsters and undead to surround the enemies and create a ring around them. This was necessary to keep the battle in the center, preventing the monsters from breaking through further and minimizing human casualties. In addition, Ziying divided the enemies. He left steel assassins and trolls for the beasts, and the undead, who were immune to poisons, fought with poisonous monkeys and rotting cadavers. Meanwhile, Ziying managed to find the Ascended One's lair and, using the enhanced spatial formation, caused an explosion. At that very moment, there was an explosion of incredible power, as if a nuclear bomb had exploded. After this, Ziying asked Tian to transfer him to those Ascended Ones who could break through the formations to the borders of the city. And the next moment, without realizing it, he was standing in front of one of the Ascended monsters. He immediately used the forbidden spell Air Energy, strengthening it 50 times and wiped the monster off the face of the earth. Tian immediately transferred him to the other monsters that had managed to pass through the formations. Ziying, using the forbidden spell Earth Energy, strengthened 500 times, dealt with several Ascended Ones in an instant. His power was noticed by the Esper heir of the Zhuge family, Zhuge Yuan, and he was shocked that someone was able to bring the management of the land to such a high level. Ziying immediately approached him and cast a buff, and Yuan didn't even have time to understand anything at that moment. After coming to his senses, Yuan asked him to stay and state his name so that the Zhuge clan could thank him. But Ziying only said that he had left a message for him and the warriors in the northern lands of Gobi, so if he wanted to express his gratitude, he should just follow his orders. After that, Ziying disappeared, and Yuan was left with even more questions, and he only understood one thing: Since he disappeared immediately after strengthening, it means he doesn't want to reveal his identity. Meanwhile, military forces were getting closer and closer to the battlefield. The supreme commander of the internal forces was Shu Chuyan, and he was confused when he landed at the site and found not a soul around. Later, they found that all the monsters that were here before were buried. Meanwhile, Chuyan met Yuan and asked if he had actually met 5 divine-level superhumans at once, but he replied that he had only seen one, and that one was wearing a mask. He also told Chuyan that the mysterious stranger disappeared immediately after he cast the buff on him and left some message on the stone. After this, Chuyan ordered all high-ranking officers and leaders of the ancient clans on the 5th line of defense to gather for an emergency meeting. Zing decided not to reveal his identity for now, so as not to make new enemies, since this was the only way to gain the army's support. He knew that human nature was unpredictable, and in war there would always be traitors. And if he revealed his name now, all his efforts would be in vain, as had already happened in his past life. As long as everyone thinks he is a coward, it will be difficult for people and enemies to associate him with superhumans. So, being a strategist in the shadows, playing the role of a coward, is the best disguise for him. Meanwhile, the news reported that Superman Yuan was leading the clan to the 7th line of defense to strengthen the defense. And at the same time, a meeting began in the military hall at the 5th line of defense. Chuyan clarified that they had gathered to discuss the message on the stone and asked the officers what they thought about it. The leader of the Zhuan Yuan clan, Ru Long, put forward his own theory, suggesting that this was not just a message but a grand strategy. And according to him, the 5 divine superhumans were going to hold the final battle right here at the 5th line of defense. He explained that by volcanic source he meant an artificial volcano, a deposit of crude oil that, when ignited, would incinerate everything in its path. And under the heavenly water, Lon suggested that there was a man-made channel hidden, through which they planned to direct water from the East Sea to the northwest. The forest of steel in turn implies an impenetrable jungle of metal, or perhaps the cultivation of huge metal giant trees. And stones that burn the heavens most likely refer to the source stones, the reserves of which are sufficient to engulf the sky in tongues of flame. Fang Ling, the general of the 2nd line of defense, added that judging from these clippings, there was a high probability that the message was left by Asura, and he, in turn, was unpredictable, so one should not rely on the word of one madman. Li Fei, the general of the 3rd line of defense, noted that Lin was right, so he asked them to refrain from mentioning Asura, since they still didn't know who these 5 divine superhumans were. The leader of the Zhuge clan, Cheng Ming, also expressed his opinion, asking for a moment of attention. He noted that even if the message was indeed left by Asura, the other 5 superhumans were certainly present. Otherwise, they would not have been informed of it after the abilities of his clan members were enhanced. Moreover, given the requirements, everything pointed to great formations and powerful spells that would require the land itself to fuel them, and in addition, they decided not to reveal themselves, a word that Lon also supported. Chuyan pointed out that since 5 divine superhumans had managed to destroy the 10th level steel assassins in less than an hour, it was worth trying to trust them. After all, as sad as it may sound, they had no other choice, so Chuyan spoke out in favor of trying to implement this plan. Following this, the start of 4 grandiose projects was announced: an artificial volcano, a great canal, a jungle of steel, and a mountain of source stones. Engineer Li, meanwhile, happily informed Zing that the new projects were similar to those they were already working on, noting that the higher-ups seemed to like their plans. However, suddenly a red funnel appeared in the sky, coming directly from the 7th line of defense. This was one of the worst-case scenarios that Zing was even afraid to imagine. The alien gates opened, causing a rift in space, although according to calculations, they should not open for another 2 years. The situation had become critical, and Zing urgently needed to come up with something to protect the people on the front lines. First, he summoned 20 million great warriors of the Han dynasty and ordered them to head to the 7th line of defense, and in addition, he sent 3 million beasts. However, they all still had to be transported to the battle site, and this required an indescribable amount of strength from Tian. Since they were thousands of kilometers away from the 7th line of defense, it was incredibly difficult for Tian to teleport them there so quickly. However, despite Zing's pleas not to do it if it was hard for her, the girl was determined to endure them at any cost. Meanwhile, on the battlefield of the 7th line of defense, preparations were in full swing for the upcoming skirmish with the monsters. The commander of the 7th line of defense was Wang Zai. He ordered the superhumans to lead the attack with the espers to follow, and the infantry to finish off the stragglers, while the artillery would provide fire support. One of the soldiers named Lao Jiang pointed out that nuclear weapons and artillery shells were not enough for such a battle. So what was the point of fighting? But Xiangshan objected that this was not the case. After all, if we recall the previous battle when they were already on the verge of defeat, these young men came with their clans and even brought 10 million immortal souls, thanks to which they managed to achieve victory. Therefore, Xiangshan assured John that, despite the slightly different situation, there was still a chance of victory, and they would find a way out even from this situation. Jan noted that although superhumans are strong, they are also made of flesh and blood. They get tired, bleed, and die. And looking at how young they all are, he becomes even more alarmed. However, no one had time to be sad because right now the lives of thousands of people depended on them. It was a fierce battle in which everyone fought with all their strength and all their potential. No one wanted to lose, so everyone rushed with all their might into the heart of the battlefield to crush the monsters. Even those who seemed to have no special fighting skills continued to fight, trying to somehow help their comrades. And those who did not possess superpowers found their strength in artillery and firearms. However, any terrible situation always has a sequel, even more complex and terrible. And this is what happened this time, when a huge alien the size of a city wall entered the battlefield. But despite the fact that a truly terrifying and powerful monster appeared before the warriors, no one retreated. Even though his strength was monstrous, even though he inspired terror with just one look, he did not become an obstacle on humanity's path to victory. In addition, the undead fought on the side of the people, and they entered into battle with the monsters with no less enthusiasm. The undead had one peculiarity: they were immortal and could be reborn infinitely. But they could be destroyed if killed several times in a row within 1 minute. Even though the giant alien had killed several hundred undead, no one stopped. On the contrary, the attacks became even more ferocious. The undead's resilience became an example to the others, and Zai ordered the fighters not to lag behind and continue to attack the alien. Meanwhile, Zing and Tian were already 200 kilometers away from the 7th line of defense. Tian's strength was running out, but the girl did not give up, continuing to fight until the end because she knew that right now her brother was fighting on the battlefield, and he needed her help. At the same time, the others continued to attack the giant alien, not allowing it to get closer to the city wall. Everyone understood that they couldn't deal with such a monster alone, so they had to act together. And even those who didn't seem to have much skill or power still continued to fight tirelessly. However, even our combined forces were still not enough to resist such a powerful monster. Moreover, the situation changed dramatically and everything became much worse, as the monster became even more aggressive. It was as if he had awakened all his inner rage, accumulated over all this time, and was ready to spill it out right now. At the same time, a helicopter carrying Xiangshan took off into the sky, and he ordered everyone to retreat immediately. 3 minutes earlier, Xiangshan had asked Zhang to take control of the artillery and provide fire support, to which Zhang asked in surprise where he was going. Xiangshan noted that this alien was not an ordinary enemy, and they had a small ship with a mini-nuclear bomb in their arsenal, so if necessary, he would be ready to sacrifice himself. Jan didn't try to stop Xiangshan, and he went straight into the alien's mouth to feed it a mini-nuclear bomb. Xiangshan was willing to give his life in exchange for a chance that the others could survive and defend the line of defense. But at that moment, someone grabbed the helicopter with the forbidden spell Wood Element and ordered it to be taken back. That someone turned out to be none other than Zing, who arrived just as his father was about to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. His appearance caused surprise, and with it, hope for victory in the battle with the giant alien. Meanwhile, Zing handed over Xinghe, ordering him to take care of her immediately, and also ordered all satellite communication devices to be turned off. No one yet understood who Zing was or why he wanted the satellites to be turned off, but they obeyed anyway, which caused a violent reaction in the command center, where they did not understand why the connection was lost. Chu Yan was worried because the giant alien had just caused a tornado, and the superhumans could be in mortal danger, and he didn't want to believe that the 7th line of defense had fallen so quickly. Meanwhile, Zing was already fighting the alien, and while an entire army couldn't hold him back, the youth seemed to be able to kill him single-handedly. Zing entered the Asura state and recognized the giant alien. It was an A-rank titan with a xenoblade. Zai was confused. Could it really be that mysterious Asura that everyone was talking about was in front of him now? But he couldn't believe it. Assuming that the young man was probably just using forbidden spells. At the same time, the alien became even more angry and repelled the attacks of hundreds of thousands of undead with just one roar. However, the undead army still did not retreat and continued to fight to the last, using all its resources and strength. Zing at this time ordered the soldiers and superhumans to retreat immediately, stating that he and the undead would be able to defeat this wave of monsters. After this, the young man rushed into battle against the alien, as if it was not an A-rank titan in front of him, but some kind of steel wolf. Using Asura's skill Demon Slayer and Hell on Earth, Zing was able to knock the monster to the ground and cut it into several pieces. However, this was not the end. The Blade Titan transformed into an even more terrifying appearance. He gained his ultimate form and became like a walking 10 blades. But for Zing, this was even a plus because the monster finally showed its ultimate form, which meant that it became easier to find its vulnerable point. Typically, this form may be the strongest, but all the energy in it is concentrated in the center, which is why the monster cannot move freely, and this played into Zing's hands. Using the Demon Blade, Zing instantly cut through the monster's defense and prevented it from escaping with his tornado, managing to locate its vulnerable point. Zing immediately used the forbidden spell Wood Element and finally killed the alien. Then he delivered the final blow followed by a powerful explosion. After killing the Titan, Zing fortified the surrounding lands from monsters using spikes and sword energy formations. He also cast the forbidden spell Earth Element and summoned the most ancient being from the primordial chaos between heaven and earth. Following this, he activated 3 million reinforced formations within a radius of 300 kilometers, which became a signal for the undead to rush into battle against the monsters. During this entire time, Zing's formation master level had reached level 5, and in order to advance to the next level, he needed to set up another 50 million formations. The young man wanted to do it right away, but as soon as he tried to activate the 3 million giant monster exterminator formations, the system gave an error due to a lack of origin stones. However, Zing did not retreat, deciding to save his resources for now but continued the battle. The young man only had 6 million origin stones left, and he planned to use them to set up formations around the entire perimeter of the city wall, strengthening them 50-fold. Meanwhile, Zai understood why the young man had ordered the satellite communication to be turned off. A deity in whose body 5 abilities had gathered was beyond comprehension, and many would consider it an anomaly, not to mention aliens. Chang'e noted that it was quite ironic. People are so strange. As soon as something happens, they hope for a god who will save them. But as soon as he actually appears, they are overcome with fear and a desire to destroy him. The other guys noted that Zing didn't waste time, not only because the situation was urgent, but also because he trusted them more than the people in the interior. In addition, Zing said to leave the battle to him, and there were only 3 hours left until dawn, and the guys decided to spend this time on recovery, to rest, and be ready to fight. Zing, meanwhile, despite having no origin stones left, decided to use his inner strength. The youth didn't even need to use formations to defeat the monsters. Asura's power alone was enough. Xiangshan noted that he was proud of his son, and Jan, who was standing next to him, was surprised because, despite the fact that he saved them all, calling him son seemed strange. His reaction was quite normal because few people knew that the young man who saved them was the same Ziying, the son of Xiangshan. Meanwhile, Tian's condition had stabilized, and there was no longer a threat to her life. Xinghe was glad that Tian had survived and would soon recover, but at the same time he blamed himself for his weakness, believing that because of this he could not fight alongside Ziying now. Zishan told him that there is a saying, "Clear minds often end their journey early." But knowing that she could not convince him otherwise, she added that he himself had the right to decide what to do. Finally, Zishan said that Ziying was probably grateful to him deep down. After some time, Tian finally woke up and, barely speaking, warned Xinghe that Ziying's abilities were using up origin stones, and since they had arrived in a hurry, he probably hadn't had time to stock up on them. Xinghe understood what Tian was hinting at and immediately went to help Ziying. At this time, Ziying continued to fight the monsters, not retreating a single step, although more than 2 days had passed since the beginning of the battle. At that moment, Xinghe came to him and told him that Tian had already woken up, and also said that there was nothing more needed here, so it would be better for him to return to where the future of humanity would be decided. He assured him that they would buy him as much time as they could and try to survive to meet again. Meanwhile, he conveyed the words of Ziying's father, who said that after the war they would definitely meet and he would prepare his signature dishes. Zishan also asked him to convey a small message of respect, which slightly surprised Ziying. After that, Zing went to the testing ground again to collect more source stones. However, he urgently needed to come up with a way to hold back the next wave of monsters, because all the undead were on the front lines and their ranks needed to be replenished. In addition, Zing needed to complete the organization of the fifth line of defense, since the sixth was already of almost no value. At the same time, people discussed various anomalous phenomena, for example, the mutation of plants in the northwest, because with each open portal the spiritual energy of the earth grew, and as the alien invasion intensified, the earth itself began to awaken. Meanwhile, Zing went to the Meteor Valley to tame a flock of giant mutated level 7 eagles there. These eagles could greatly strengthen his army of beasts, help in battles with monsters, and be useful for other purposes. In addition, these animals were distinguished by high aggression and confidence in attack. In addition, they had strong defense, and sometimes even some espers could not cope with them. Therefore, such a monster was an excellent boost for Zing's army of beasts, and it would be foolish not to take advantage of this chance, especially since it turned out to be quite easy for the young man to tame them. He then gave the eagles orders not to attack cities, not to harm people, to guard the meteorite valley, and to collect the source stones while awaiting his further instructions. Thus, Zing was able to raise his taming level to the 8th, the maximum, which made him incredibly happy. In the meantime, he also rescued a young level 5 esper named Huang Jia, and those who were with him fled as soon as they saw the eagles. Jia said that they were from the Huang clan of the Inner Territories, subordinate to the Superman Huang Xiao, and they were sent to the northeastern border to explore and capture the spiritual mountains. Zing was surprised that someone would decide to take over the mountains, but Jia explained that the spiritual energy in several high mountains on the northwestern border had increased dramatically, and many people had flocked there to cultivate. Zing noted that such a sudden surge of energy was most likely caused by the Void Gate, the spatial rift that the Xenos had opened, and so he wanted to summon another wave of undead, using the mountains to activate the resonance throughout the northwest. Meanwhile, he told Jia to return to the clan and report that he had a great idea on how to use all the spiritual mountains of the northwest, and also to warn that occupying the mountains was prohibited. And if anyone tried to disobey, regardless of clan, Zing himself would convince them to change their mind. And at that moment, he heard a strange sound coming from the depths of the mountains. Following the sound, he spotted a mutated poisonous lizard and couldn't pass up the chance to tame it. Since the Xenos have their rotting behemoths, Zing will now have poisonous lizards. Immediately after taming them, he gave the lizards the same orders. Do not attack cities, do not harm people, guard the meteorite valley, and collect source stones while awaiting his further orders. After this, Zing went to the tomb of the Tang dynasty, an empire that shook the world, before which all nations bowed and whose army was considered invincible. The young man managed to summon the emperors and generals of the Tang dynasty, among whom were Li Yuan, the founder of the dynasty, Li Shimin, the ruler of the Zhenguan era, and Empress Wu Zetian. As a result, Zing's undead army was joined by another 30 million Tang dynasty soldiers. Meanwhile, Zing asked the emperors to take command of the army and divide their troops among the 3 great mountain ranges of the northwestern border, while he himself would wait for them at Mount Tang Modao, where these ranges converge. He also warned them that if anyone stood in their way, they should first try to negotiate, but always be ready to fight. Meanwhile, Jia reported to Xiao that someone was trying to take over the mountains and was outraged that someone dared to go against him. Jia explained that this was no ordinary person, but the very same divine-level beast tamer, but Jia didn't care, because he considered himself stronger since he was a 10th-level superhuman, chosen by heaven itself. After that at night, Xiao and the others set out to capture Mount Tang Modao. He stated that since the other clans had acknowledged him as the owner of this mountain, no one had the right to even try to take it away from him, even if it was a divine-level tamer. At this moment, Zing, hearing his loud statements, appeared in front of him, causing great surprise. Zing noted that if Xiao was truly willing to kill anyone who dared to go against him, then that was exactly what he was here for. However, despite Zing's threatening words, Xiao was not worried about anything, because he was confident that he was many times stronger than him. However, his self-confidence and stubbornness ultimately proved his undoing. Xiao thought that Zing was just a beast tamer, and that it would be easy for him to deal with him. But he was shocked when the youth attacked him first with a lightning blade. Unlike Zing, Xiao did not respect his subordinates and was willing to use them as human shields. According to Xiao, servants are just pawns, ordinary victims who are only required to protect their master. Following this, Xiao decided to demonstrate his strength to Zing and prove that he was strong not only in words. Zing also had no intention of giving in, but he did not use his sword to avoid being accused of murder. When Xiao used Jia as a human shield, Zing lost his temper, and his anger filled the surroundings. The young man used the forbidden spell Lightning Element, activated a twofold overload, and sent a powerful stream of power straight at Xiao. As a result, it turned out that Xiao was only strong in words, but in reality his strength was no greater than even a low-ranking monster. At this moment, Huang Jutian, the patriarch of the Huang family, came to them, but he did not behave aggressively even after seeing what happened, but calmly asked what happened. Although other family members insisted that such an enemy should be eliminated immediately, Jutian pointed out that it was worth listening to him first. Zing was glad that, unlike Xiao, Jutian was reasonable, and explained to him that he was one of the Northwest divine-level superhumans and possessed forbidden spells. He also said that for the sake of the future of humanity, all the spiritual mountains of the Northwest must be handed over to him, since they cannot be privately owned. Zing added that he had warned Xiao about this in advance, but Xiao had attacked him with his fists, angering the Huang family members. However, Jutian held a different opinion and stated that Xiao's actions were indeed wrong, and that the reason for this was that he was given too much leeway. Jutian explained that by acting so recklessly, Xiao was endangering both humanity and the family's reputation. The patriarch apologized to Zing, admitted his mistake, and agreed to hand over the mountains if necessary. Zing was pleased with how easily Jutian had come to his aid and his fair decision. At this time, one of the undead armies occupied the Dragon Mountain and declared that under the conditions of the Great Era, this mountain could not belong to private individuals, demanding that the other clans immediately leave it. The same thing happened on Mount Hua, where they also warned that anyone who disobeyed would face inevitable punishment. At the same time, on Mount Kunlun, the emperors of the armies admired the wisdom of their descendants and placed great hopes on them. At this moment, Zing climbed to the top of Mount Tang Modao to conduct the 6th level Immortal Soul Fusion. After that, the song of Wang Qin's triumphal march rang out, which could be heard for several hundred kilometers around. This march reached both the hospital and the reserve defense line, including the training ground, filling everyone with a strength similar to Zing's reinforcement. The news reported that, according to preliminary data, 8 million residents of the northwestern border had manifested 4th-level Soul Exterminator abilities last night. In addition, due to the fact that the people of the Northeast also gained abilities, the ancient sunken forests turned into a steel jungle, where Scouts Espers of the wood element have already gone, having previously designated this area as extremely dangerous. Tian thought that it was Zing who caused the mutation of the ancient forests, but it turned out that this was not the case. And since the changes in the forest were serious, the young man decided that they would go there first. At the same time, at dawn, a strange phenomenon occurred in the ancient forests, similar to a tide of monsters, and it seemed that they were preparing to attack the city. Li, a wood elementalist, went there with the rest of the guys to scout out the area and wanted to find out the monsters' tactics and combat power before retreating. However, as a result, the monsters surrounded them, and Li noticed that the trees were not only conscious, but their movements were coordinated. Realizing the dangerous situation they were in, Li ordered everyone to get ready, but they were unable to attack or even hold back the trees, and Li already thought that their lives would end there, and they would not even have time to warn the city. Suddenly, the trees' behavior changed. Their blue eyes turned red and they abruptly stopped attacking. This was explained simply. Zing managed to arrive just at the moment when the trees became active, and having tamed them, ordered them not to attack cities and not to harm people. He also told them that their main task would be to protect the ancient forest, collect the source stones, and wait for further instructions. Meanwhile, Zing discovered a new skill, King's Aura, which allows him to subdue and tame beasts using the ancient aura of the Beast King. He also mastered the skill Ancient Awakening, which allows him to summon the progenitor when a 100 million monster tide appears to increase his combat power, in addition to the forbidden spell, Earthstorm. Zing was surprised at how quickly he had managed to unlock several new useful skills, and in the meantime, he wanted to use the Origin Stones to complete the formations on the 5th reserve line of defense, but he no longer had the strength left. As a result, he lost consciousness, and Tian immediately transferred him to the training ground dormitory, and the young man woke up only a few days later. Ziying began to blame himself for this, but Tian noted that he had already done everything he could because while he was between the front lines, summoning immortal souls and taming all the beasts, he had never closed his eyes. Meanwhile, Tien also wanted to help him, but she had nothing but the ability to teleport, and this greatly upset her. But Zing said that everything was fine, because they were not fighting alone against the monsters. After that at night, Zing went to the fifth line of defense, activating 10 million blazing fire formations and elemental sword formations there, stretching them out for 200 kilometers. To do this, he stocked up in advance on source stones, which he obtained at the testing ground, in the Meteorite Valley and in the ancient forest. This time, the young man was confident that this amount of resources would be enough to provide reliable protection. He also activated 20 million freezing formations and earth spikes, stretching them out for 300 kilometers, and an additional 30 million lightning strikes for another 300 kilometers. As a result, the formation wall was almost complete, and his formation master level had reached 7th, and for the next one, he needed to place 70 million formations. At the same time, the news reported that after the mass awakening, the development of infrastructure in the northwest had accelerated, and the Great 1,000-kilometer Canal project had been fully completed. However, not everyone saw this as a good sign. Some saw it as ordinary corruption, such as the heir of the Zhao family, as well as Qian Bing and Sun Li, who wanted to hold a live broadcast to expose the three major projects. At this time, Zing continued to place formations, strengthening the defense against the impending monster attack. The young man had become much stronger since he had arrived at the training ground, and it seemed that he was now capable of fighting an entire army of aliens on his own. Meanwhile, he used the forbidden 5th-level water spell, Water Dragon Charge, and summoned a powerful monster into this world. However, he did not summon him just like that, but to test what combinations of techniques are capable of. He ordered the dragon to attack him, while he himself activated Asura's defense. As a result, the forbidden water spell alone was enough to push back Asura's defense, and Zing realized that if he combined them and strengthened them with the power of the Great Channel, it would be possible to turn the tide of the battle. In this way, he also raised his elemental caster level to the 6th level, and to advance to the next level, he needed to use 6,000 forbidden spells. At the same time, 3 young guys went live, promising to destroy 3 main projects, and the first thing they did was take on the Great Channel. The audience enthusiastically supported them, calling them the heroes they had been waiting for and those who would finally challenge corruption. They all used their powers at once to destroy the Great Canal, but it proved extremely difficult. The spectators were delighted with the boys' performance and supported them with all their might. At this time, Zing and Tian were on Mount Tangmo Dao, and as she expected, thanks to the power of the spiritual mountain, the power of the immortal souls was growing stronger. Tian then asked him if the abilities of the city's residents who had recently awakened would also be strengthened, and Zing replied that this was exactly the case. At that moment, Zing noticed something strange in the sky, and he was overcome by a familiar feeling, as if an A-rank Xenos was about to appear. The young man wondered if the foreigners had really found out about his plan, and decided not to hesitate, immediately activating the water dragon's attack. The dragon immediately attacked the 3 young men whom Zing mistook for foreigners. Fortunately, he did not kill them with the first blow, but only threw them onto dry land. However, the dragon had no intention of stopping, and his gaze showed clear killing intent. At this moment, Zing appeared, and was surprised to realize that there were only 3 young men in front of him. Meanwhile, Zing asked them who they were and what they were doing here. The guys replied that they were superhumans of the 3 great families. The guys admitted why they came and tried to justify themselves by saying that when they saw Zing here, they realized everything. Zing did not lecture them, but instead demanded that they take him to their clans and added that if they did not want to be exterminated, they had better hurry. This greatly surprised and at the same time scared the guys, because the guy in front of them turned out to be so strong that he was not afraid to face their families. Meanwhile, Mount Heavenly Peak, where the Zhang family was located, was attacked by A-rank Xenos, the very thing that Zing feared the most. Meanwhile, he told the Zhang family members that now was not the time for tears, and if they wanted revenge, they should follow him. After that, they went to the Qian family's estate on the Phoenix Mountain Range, and it was also attacked by monsters. Ziying then headed to the Sun family's estate in Jade Pass, which was attacked by the A-rank Xenos, the Blazing Sky Eagle. However, this time he was unable to escape from Ziying because the young man finally caught up with him. Ziying attacked the monster using the skill Asura's Rapid Slaughter and instantly broke through its defense. He then activated his Berserker mode and dealt several more powerful blows to his opponent. Despite the damage, the eagle continued to hold on and was even able to counterattack. However, Zing was saved from such sudden attacks each time by Tian, using her teleportation ability. Meanwhile, the Xenos acknowledged the youth's strength and said that he was not worthy of even death but only slavery. These words angered Zing even more. Rage overwhelmed him, and using Asura's skill, Dragon Slash, he decided to finish off the monster once and for all. The eagle tried to resist Zing's attack and was confident that he could repel it. As a result, he actually managed to block the previous blow, but immediately after that, Zing froze him and activated the skill Hell on Earth. He then empowered the very same youths who had previously tried to destroy one of his projects. The result of the battle was that Zing killed the Xenos and showed a worthy example of his strength to others. He also asked them not to ask how to avenge their clans, but rather to go to the fifth line of defense and prepare for war. These events immediately made it into the news, where it was reported that 4 A-class Z assassins had infiltrated the inner territories, and the ancient clans of Zhao, Qian, Sun, Sen, and Wang had been wiped out. It was also mentioned that Asura helped people again by killing the Blazing Sky Eagle and thus saving the heirs of the Yang, Bing, and Li clans. Meanwhile, Zing collected a few more source stones and went to the East Sea to tame the sea beasts. The vast ocean was home to the strongest monsters, mutated swordfish and level 9 tiger sharks, as well as mutated level 10 white sharks. Now, 100 million sea beasts fought on Zing's side and obeyed his orders. At the same time, Chang Kong, the East Sea Superman from the Land family, watched the sea beasts rampage with surprise. Chang Kong thought that one of the monsters had started a rebellion and was going to attack everyone, so he immediately sounded the alarm and ordered the clan to prepare for battle. The Lan family had guarded the East Sea for generations, and Chang Kong could not allow the monsters to run amok. As he got closer, he was even more surprised. It turned out that it was not one animal, but a whole flock of different species that were supposed to be enemies. Zing at this time ordered the beasts not to attack cities and people, but instead to collect source stones and destroy alien invaders. Chang Kong noticed how the murderous aura suddenly disappeared, but at that moment something strange appeared behind him. Before Chang Kong could comprehend the situation, he saw the sea beasts rushing to attack the enemies. The swordfish was focused on fighting the Cyclops turtle at this time. Tiger sharks fought with a spiny snake, and the white sharks, being the highest ranking, fought with the ice dragon. However, it was not easy against the ice dragon. He froze all his opponents in an instant. At this time, the swordfish attacked the Cyclops turtle, but its chances of success were slim. Zing realized that sea beasts could easily deal with opponents below A rank, but were still powerless against A rank. The young man then activated a 50-fold boost at a distance of 700 nautical miles. At that moment, an ice dragon appeared behind Chang Kong, who was stunned by what was happening, and he barely had time to notice it. But Chang Kong did not feel fear, but on the contrary was determined to defeat him and defend the honor of his family. However, the monster's power was too great, and even Chang Kong's water dragon could not resist it. At that moment, the enhancement spread to Chang Kong as well, filling him with even more power. Chang Kong was pleasantly surprised, although he didn't fully understand how exactly he had become stronger. It made him even more determined and awakened confidence in victory. After this, Chang Kong's powers seemed to gain a completely different power, and he was able to wipe the ice dragon off the face of the earth in an instant. At the same time, the already strengthened sea animals were able to cope with the spiny snake, as well as the Cyclops turtle. Zing was glad that his fighting power had finally reached such a level, and in between, he asked Tian to bring Chang Kong to him. Chang Kong was screaming at this time, trying to reach the beast tamer, expressing deep gratitude for his help in saving his life. At that moment, Tian suddenly appeared in front of him and immediately grabbed him, instantly moving him into Zing. Zing immediately asked him not to ask anything, but just listen carefully to what he had to say. He asked Chang Kong if he could destroy about 10,000 alien monsters, and he replied that for the sake of peace, he was ready to lay down his life without hesitation. For this, Zing rewarded him with a 10-fold boost and declared that Chang Kong was now the master of the East Sea, with 100 million sea beasts under his control. At this moment, Tian noticed something strange. The Void Gate began to expand, and the 7th line of defense might not be able to withstand it. Meanwhile, the A-rank aliens arrived at the 7th line of defense, and the order was given to abandon it. Xinghe noted that Zing ordered a retreat because the 7th line was almost destroyed. The 6th had already been evacuated, and forces needed to be concentrated on the 5th. While the army was retreating, the superhumans tried to buy as much time for it as possible. At this time, the undead entered the battle, declaring that they would now take all the damage on themselves and that Xinghe and the others should also retreat. Meanwhile, a complete evacuation of the 7th line of defense was announced, where only the undead and beasts remained, and the 6th line held out to buy time for the 5th. In the 5th line of defense, about 300 million people participated in the battle. 80 million of them had superpowers, and in the East China Sea, the Lan family released the spirit and completed the 4 great projects. Meanwhile, Zing prepared for the decisive battle and went to the Fiery Heavenstone facility, where he absorbed its source and power. He then headed to the Forest of Steel facility and cast the Forbidden Gold spell, forging the steel. After that, Zing arrived at the Volcano Source facility and summoned the Lava Dragon, the ruler of the mountains and seas there. At the same time, he raised the star control spell to the maximum level, at which even the blue star would not be able to resist it. However, Zing wanted to use it during the decisive battle. He then went to places where it was still possible to tame animals and summon spirits, and called the Guangdong defenders to his side. Thanks to this, he gathered another 100 million undead troops and ordered them to prepare for the defense of the 5th line. After this, he took up the taming of animals, strengthening the army with mutated poisonous insects and vipers. Following this, his entire new army, under his command, moved towards the 5th line of defense. However, Zing had spent too much energy on all this, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for him to move at the same pace. However, he did not give up, and having arrived at the 5th line of defense, he activated the spell Fiery Purgatory for 10,000 kilometers, then Hell Sword, and Spikes of the Abyss for the same distance. Meanwhile, he raised the Source of Spiritual Origin to the maximum, and could now summon any creature of heaven and earth into battle. So Zing finally brought all his 5 talents to the maximum and combined them into one. The pain and pressure from the new power was unbearable, but Zing did not give up and tried to hold on to her. After that, Zing finally returned to the others after a long time. However, now he looked a little different. His short dark hair was long and white. This raised many questions from his comrades, but Zing explained that the sudden change was due to him completing his preparations for battle. After that, he announced that the monsters would soon reach the 5th line of defense, and before the decisive battle he had something to say. The young man admitted that the so-called 5 divine geniuses of the Northwest did not exist. In fact, it was him all this time. This caused a strong reaction from everyone. No one could believe that Zing, who was considered a coward and deserter, had gained such power. He also stated that all their forces were concentrated on the 5th line of defense, and if they lost, there would be no turning back. And although they had prepared as much as possible, it was still not enough to win, especially because of the S-class and above behind enemy lines. So Zing decided to gather a suicide squad with special abilities to enter the portal together and launch a counterattack. Zing said he needed about 10 such fighters, and the first to volunteer was Tian, who was only 9 years old but was already ready to sacrifice herself. Xingyi also stated that he was willing to go with them. At 23 years old, he was a genius of the 130th generation of the Chu clan and possessed the aura of a field at the peak of an ancient god. Chang'e also joined them. He was 25 years old, but he was already a master of spirit control, and the peak of his power was equal to an ancient god. Sui and Ying, 18-year-old members of the Qin clan, ancient god-level plant spirit summoners, were also willing to side with Ziying. They were also joined by Chang Kong, a 23-year-old ancient god-level water elemental prodigy. Meanwhile, Yuan, who was only 22 years old and had no outstanding abilities, but was willing to be in charge of supplies and had a divine level of cooking, wanted to join them. Ziying's squad was also joined by Leng, who at 23 years old had level 10 perception and intelligence skills. And with her was Kaer, 3 years younger but with a level 10 gift of time retrospection. Meanwhile, Zishan, Ziying's sister, also expressed her desire to join because their father was very worried about him, and she could not leave her brother alone. Lianyi and Xiaonan from the pharmaceutical department also wanted to join Ziying, noting that one doctor would clearly not be enough. After this, Ziying announced that the Suicide Rapid Counterattack Squad had been officially formed. Following this, under Ziying's orders, the squad launched a counterattack against the alien creatures. However, before the battle began, Tian transferred everyone to another world and created a small house there where they could rest, cook food, create potions, and much more. In addition, in this world, time flowed in sync with the outside world, so this house could be considered a separate universe, free from interference, and its name was the Nest of Peace. Ziying was a little confused after all. Their main mission was to attack the monsters first, so there was no point in relaxing so much. but the others reminded him that they were people, including him, and rest was vital for them, so taking a little breather before a great battle was not a bad idea. Besides, none of them had slept for 3 days, and in such a state it would be difficult to fight the foreigners with dignity. Changkong was incredibly surprised when he saw the house and said that it was literally his dream house. Changge did not share his delight and was strangely surprised when he opened the door and saw what was inside. He noted that he had the feeling that they were all leaving for eternity with peace. Tian replied that she was very glad that everyone liked everything, and this surprised Changge even more. However, almost no one had the strength to speak, and the only thing the guys wanted now was to have a good rest. While some decided to rest, others began to look around, checking the kitchen and storage area. Zing also noted that he felt something strange, as if the sun was shining and a light wind was blowing, as if after the end of the world. Meanwhile, Yuan was already busy cooking in the kitchen, promising to throw a real festive dinner before the battle. Meanwhile, Sui and Ying took up growing fresh vegetables, which didn't take long since they were both plant spirit summoners. At this time, Xiaonan and Liani were amazed at Tian's power, which was able to teleport all their equipment to the new world. In addition to the pharmacy, Tian was also able to recreate the hospital for Xishan. At the same time, Lan and Kier were going on reconnaissance, having previously established void reconnaissance points 30 kilometers from the gate. After some time, Yuan had already set the table and asked everyone to sit down quickly. When everyone gathered in one place, Zing wanted to tell the guys about the battle plan. But Singhi asked to hear him out first, noting that the teleportation portals in the front and backyard were ready. Through the front one could return to the 5th line of defense in case of an emergency. Through the back one, you can get to the gates of the void. And on the handle of the back door, there is a red button, by pressing, which you can get to the reconnaissance point 30 kilometers from the gate, where Len and Care are on duty. Xingyi also pointed out that Yuan, Lianyi, Xiaonan, and Zishan would remain in the Tranquility Nest for the rear, since they were not fighters. But Zishan countered that, although she was not a warrior, she was still a healer, and could help on the battlefield. Ziying did not try to persuade her and announced that after dinner everyone would have 3 hours to rest, after which they would begin their advance. Lianyi and Xiaonian were unhappy that they were called weak in battle, but they did not argue, realizing that they would be more useful in the rear. It was a truly peaceful time. For the first time in many years, the guys were able to catch their breath and forget about the monsters, even if only for a couple of hours. A few hours later, the squad headed to attack, and at that time, Lan and Care recorded the aura of 1,000,000 awakened ones. In addition to the foreigners, judging by their clothes, these were the same 1,000,000 Buddhas from the country of Asan. Meanwhile, at the Gate of Emptiness, they set up an ambush of 1,000,000 Buddhas, whose minimum level was the 8th and the maximum was the Old God. Everything was exactly as Lan and Care had reported. 1,000,000 Buddhas were waiting for them at the gates, who immediately declared that the fight was pointless, because the aliens were true gods, the embodiment of the highest Buddhist wisdom. But his words did not cause fear in the boys. On the contrary, they only fueled their determination to fight even more. After that, everyone rushed into the attack at once to prove that they were not second-rate monsters, but true defenders of humanity. Buddha regarded their stubbornness and desire for victory as stupidity and attacked first. However, the guys also had something to respond with, and moreover, to show their superiority. After this, a fierce battle began, the outcome of which determined the future fate of humanity. But it was not without problems. The 1,000,000 Buddhas acted as a single formation. Their strength was superior to Ziying's detachment, and the Buddha's body was scattered and rebuilt to wear down the enemy at an early stage. As a result, they had to change tactics, and the first thing they had to do was to destroy the enemy's formation, no matter how difficult it was. At this moment, they were attacked by the 9,000 fists in one technique, but Tian managed to instantly teleport them away. Following this, she transferred them directly to the enemy, and Zing immediately used the skill Forbidden Spell Strike. In this way, he was able to shake the enemy's line a little, after which Shakya, the chief guard, immediately tried to restore the protective barrier. Meanwhile, the diamond guards posed a particular threat, one of whom was Vijay. He was taken on by Changge. Sini attacked the second guard named Anup, who was no less strong. Changkong fought with the third guardian named Deepak. Sui and Ying attacked the fourth guard named Raj. At this time, Ziying summoned the undead and sent them against the other Buddhas. However, the opponents were not going to give up either, and the stubbornness of Ziying and his comrades only made them even more angry. As a result, Shakya hit Ziying with a mental attack that almost caused his head to explode. However, his rage and determination helped him repel the enemy's attack, and he immediately counterattacked Shakya. Shakya was furious, especially after Zing said that he was not a Buddha at all, but a yellow-browed monster from the Temple of Little Thunder. In response, he used one of his strongest attacks, but Zing used the 5-element Hell Ray and managed to destroy it. After this, he found himself right in front of Shakya and was ready to deliver the decisive blow. Zing used the forbidden spell Lava Asura and attacked the enemy. Shakya tried to defend himself with the Diamond Mantra, but Zing did not stop and used Ice Asura and Shackles. As a result, Shakya was defeated and immediately disappeared, which surprised Zing. Could it really be that an S-class alien appeared? Because in the past life, this meant the end of humanity. At that moment, he heard his father's voice and, turning around, saw Shakya holding him hostage and ordering him to surrender, claiming that the foreign gods had taken an interest in him and would spare him if they submitted. Meanwhile, the boys continued to fight the guards, which was very difficult, and upon hearing Xiangshan's voice, they lost their vigilance and barely survived. Luckily, Tian quickly teleported them to safety and Zishan immediately healed them. At the same time, Zingi continued to fight with Anup and told the others not to be distracted, but to trust Zing. Changi agreed with him and continued the battle. Changkong also did not lag behind and, despite attacks with fire and poison, did not give up. Shakya was furious and couldn't understand why they didn't realize he could kill their leader's father. Zing didn't rush to conclusions and asked his father if he really wanted him to kneel down to save him. At this moment, Tian intervened, offering to teleport Xiangshan, but Zing refused, asking her to focus on protecting others. To his son's question, Xiangshan replied that of course he wanted him to save him, and at that very moment, Zing teleported behind Shakya and attacked. He didn't just ask this question, he made sure that it wasn't his father in front of him, but an S-class stranger. The stranger was amazed at how Zing had exposed him and asked about it, but the youth was unwilling to talk and attacked again. Zing struck one after another as if it wasn't an S-class alien, but an ordinary mob. In reality, the enemy's strength lay in illusions and shape-shifting, but for Zing it didn't matter. He was obsessed with destroying monsters. However, the stranger managed to penetrate his consciousness and showed him memories of his family. In these memories, the father never interfered in his son's personal affairs, even when he was beaten, so that he would become strong and be able to protect his loved ones. Thus he taught him to fight back, even if the enemy was older and stronger, and awakened confidence in him. When Xiangshan watched his son fight for his own and not give up, it made him proud. He himself never showed weakness. Even when he suffered, he continued to smile and joke. Zing was furious and couldn't understand how the stranger knew about his family because he couldn't penetrate his mind. He explained that he took the memories from his father's mind and added that with such power, Zing was indeed capable of killing him. However, the stranger had a major trump card in their battle. He actually managed to capture Xiangshan. He noted that the wounds Xiangshan received were from fighting on the defensive line. So it could be said that he saved him by dragging him along with him, and now he believes that the time has come to repay the debt. At the same time, Leng informed Zing that it was indeed Xiangshan. She had just received a message from the 5th line of defense about his sudden disappearance on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the stranger had completely merged with Xiangshan's blood, and now he had literally become his father. If you let your father go, you will let the stranger go. If you kill the stranger, your father will die too. This really left Zing stumped and he didn't know what to do. However, Zing still decided to attack the stranger, despite the risk of harming his father. Using the forbidden lava spell, Zing easily struck the alien, and he didn't even try to resist. After this, Zing seemed to lose himself and couldn't believe what he had just done. The guys were fighting off the parasites at this time, and Tian became curious as to why Zing couldn't bring back Xiangshan right now, since he could summon the dead. Zishan replied that he probably couldn't summon those who had fallen on the battlefields with aliens. Meanwhile, they exterminated the bugs, which were incredibly tenacious, but with the help of Sui and Ying's abilities, they were able to defeat them. At the same time, the guards tried to escape as they had lost their true appearance and main trump card. However, the boys weren't going to let them escape after everything that had happened. While Changkong grabbed one guard, Chang'e grabbed another, and in an instant they were finished. Zing also decided not to lag behind, and using Asura's Hell on Earth mode, cleared the battlefield of monsters. And Sui and Ying at this time caught the last guard and destroyed him, and at the place of his death a memorial tree grew. Meanwhile, dawn arrived, and Zing summoned all the fallen Buddhas and ordered them to attack the other monsters. At the same time, Yuan moved through the portal to them, preparing a small snack for the guys. And while the boys were getting together, Zing asked Ying to plant a tree on the spot where his father died, because he was afraid he would not be able to find him later. Zing was sure that he would meet his father again, but now it was more important to rest, regain his strength, and rush into battle again. Chang'e, meanwhile, tried to maintain the team's fighting spirit and encourage the guys in every possible way, saying that a great battle awaited them ahead. In addition, Zing instructed Leng to compile the alien handbook and transmit it to the fifth line of defense in real time. The first was the Succubus, an S-class alien that could create illusions and possess bodies but had weak defense. At the same time, Lan received a report from the fifth line of defense. An S-class alien named Sonic Bat King had appeared at the front lines. Meanwhile, the Void Gate ejected a whole horde of A-class aliens, and the situation on the fifth line became increasingly critical. Ziying declared that he would go to the fifth line of defense with Tian to help the others, and asked the rest of the guys to deal with the A-class in this world. Meanwhile, the situation on the fifth line of defense was critical, but thanks to Ziying's previously established formations, it was possible to at least contain it a little. The army of beasts also held back the onslaught of the monsters and put up a worthy fight. The army of the undead also did not retreat and fought desperately, defending humanity. The biggest threat was the S-class alien, which used sound waves to instantly destroy any target. Its waves caused explosions of energy in people's bodies, causing them to self-destruct. No one could deal with him, so Zai ordered everyone to retreat to the underground fortifications to save their strength. By that time, Ziying had already arrived at the fifth line of defense and was struck by the alien's sonic attack. He then used the forbidden sound element spell, Great Sound Silence, to muffle the attack and preserve the city's combat capability. After that, he wanted to strike the alien, but it had incredible speed and easily dodged. In addition to sonic attacks, the alien could also plunge the enemy into darkness. But Ziying had an answer. Using the forbidden spell Light, he instantly cut through his darkness. Then the alien attacked with sound again, and Ziying tried to block the attack with the silencing spell, but without amplification it was weak, so he amplified it 100-fold. However, even this was not enough. He increased the spell by 1,000, 10,000, and finally 1,000,000 times, and only in this way did he manage to repel the attack. But the sound spells absorbed too many origin stones. In addition, the soundproof dome was too large and fragile, and the alien could easily penetrate it. Ziying had to strengthen it 3 billion times. Even though the youth had around 500 trillion origin stones, wasting them on such attacks was too wasteful. Ziying asked Tian to find a way to teleport him and the alien away from the fifth line of defense. But as soon as she tried to do so, the alien immediately attacked her. Tian was seriously injured, and miraculously Ziying managed to capture her with the forbidden wood spell Protection, after which he handed her over to Zai, asking him to take care of her. At this time, Ziying continued to hold back the alien's attacks and at the same time thought of how to defeat him. Using the same forbidden spell, Soundwave, and amplifying it 100 million times, Ziying managed to hit the alien. Moreover, he damaged his eardrums and thus further angered the enemy. He tried to attack with sound again, and Ziying responded in kind, amplifying his attack 100 million times. However, the alien had incredible strength, and Ziying only had a few origin stones left, so he needed to deal one decisive blow. Since the sound waves created by forbidden magic had a limited amount of energy but used up origin stones, Ziying decided to try to transform ordinary sound into a weapon. He used the forbidden spell Sound Transformation, but his efforts weren't enough, so if 1,000,000 people screamed at the same time, the attack would definitely work. Meanwhile, the alien managed to break through the soundproof dome and made its way to the people. The young man cast the forbidden spell Dome of Silence 500 million times, but he knew that the barrier would not last long, and so he asked Zai to give the order to all the inhabitants to scream. Zai did not fully understand Ziying's plan but immediately conveyed to all citizens, "Shout with him. This is necessary for victory." After this, everyone shouted in one voice, "Dacia will win!" And along with the people, the animals, and even the undead shouted. At this moment, Ziying activated the forbidden spell Sound Absorption and directed the attack at the alien. He was confident that such power would be enough to finish off the enemy once and for all. Ziying used Sound Transformation and Soundwave, stacking them 1,000,000,000 times. Despite the alien's attempts to defend himself and counterattack, it did not help him, and he found himself pinned down. As a result, through the combined efforts of all the residents and armies, the alien was defeated, and the roar of the dragon Ziying was heard by all the people of Daxia. After this, Ziying wanted to immediately head to the Void Gate to prevent another invasion, and asked Zai to report any appearance of such enemies. Meanwhile, Tien's condition was critical and she had almost no strength left for teleportation. However, she was able to create a portal to another world so that Zing and the others could return, after which she lost consciousness. At this time, at the Gates of Emptiness, the guys fought with all their might, not allowing the monsters to break through into the ordinary world. No one acted alone. Everyone understood that victory was only possible with complete coordination. As a result, the guys dealt with all the monsters and were finally able to take a little rest. Xingyi noted that he was curious about how Ziying was doing, to which Changkong responded that in their situation, no news was already good news. Xingyi added that after the waves of A-class monsters were teleported, the gate would stop working for a while, which meant that there was some principle behind the teleportation. After that, he asked Lan to record all teleportation emissions and monster levels. At the same time, a new fault was activated, which no one expected. At this moment, Ziying returned to the Nest of Peace and, running to Xiaonan and Lianyi, asked them to carefully examine Tian. Xiaonan immediately gave her a gentle recovery remedy, but warned her that it would take time to recover, and her internal wounds were serious, and even after she woke up, she would not be able to use her abilities. At this time, Leng informed Ziying that a new S-class alien had appeared at the Void Gate, whose abilities were still unknown, and added that Xingye asked him to convey that if they couldn't handle it themselves, they were unworthy of being his comrades. Meanwhile, the country of Migo had fallen. 1,000,000 awakened traitors, led by an alien S-class, a spacebreaker, were moving towards the fifth line of defense and were supposed to arrive in 5 hours. However, after the battle with the Sound King, Ziying had almost no origin stones left, and without them he was literally nothing, and without teleportation it was impossible to replenish them. Lianyan suggested using the elixir she had created the day before. It briefly increases physical strength but burns out vital energy. Ziying replied that he couldn't use it on a 9-year-old girl and would fly for the Source Stones for now, calling on the Hawks. Tian had already woken up by that time and said that she was ready to take the elixir, but Ziying replied that there was no elixir. She had dreamed it all. However, Tian realized that he was lying, and despite his attempts to dissuade her and convince her not to be stubborn, she said that she stubbornly pretended to be mute and just as stubbornly followed him. After these words, she teleported the elixir to herself and immediately swallowed it. Her body suddenly rose into the air and something strange began to happen. But after a couple of seconds, Tian came to her senses and was ready to use her abilities. After that, Ziying asked Xiaonan to prepare some elixir for him too, and at the same time, Yuan came to them, saying that if they were going to leave, they should definitely eat before that. Meanwhile, Xinghe, Changge, Changkong, as well as Sui and Ying were trying to resist the alien S-class without Ziying's help. Changge decided to use his puppets to attack first, activating the ghost control threads. After this, his mini-army went into battle but quickly fell as the alien attacked them with corrosion, which instantly ate away the puppets' bodies. In order to somehow stop the corrosion, Changkong used the skill Boundless Ocean, Water Cube, and was able to temporarily stop its spread. He then sealed the alien's corrosion into a cube, but was unable to completely suppress it, only temporarily contain it. However, the alien's attacks continued, and to protect themselves, Sui and Ying recreated a shield from the root plates. Xinghe meanwhile said that while the cube holds the corrosion, they need to find a way to attack the alien and find its weak point. To which Ying replied that they could grow flammable plants that would need to be set on fire. After this, Sui and Ying grew flammable plants and bound the alien with them, and Xinghe, using the sword chi that could create sparks, went to set them on fire. Despite the fact that the plan worked and the alien was set on fire, it had another feature. It could divide and grow back. The guys found themselves in a difficult situation, but since they wanted to prove their strength to Ziying, they began to come up with a new plan. Meanwhile, the drops of corrosion that Sui and Ying were holding back with the shield had almost eaten away at it. And an additional problem was that they couldn't control the black rain, which was not water but fission particles. Xinghe noted that fire attacks could destroy its core and slow down its regeneration a little, but only from a distance, and if they could get to its core, they could set it on fire. Zishan, to whom Tian left spatial bubbles, could help them with this. Meanwhile, Zishan finally reached them and initially wanted to heal Xinghe, but he replied that there was no need for that yet and asked if her holy light could neutralize the corrosion. Following this, Zishan created a holy shield, and although it didn't last long, it did indeed hold back the corrosion. But with her powers, such a shield could only be created twice. After that, Xinghe and Zishan went to find the alien core, and Xinghe also asked Sui and Ying to create flammable and explosive seeds, and Chang'e to use large puppets to return the seeds and accurately throw them into the core. Gathering their determination, the boys headed straight into the heart of the monster, believing that the plan would work. At the same time, they attacked the other with a joint attack. Xinghe used the Field of 10,000 Swords, Mighty, and Zishan used the skill Enveloping with Holy Light. Thanks to this, they quickly found the alien's core, and all that was left was to destroy it. However, it was necessary to act very quickly, since the alien was regenerating at a high speed. However, Chang'e's puppets managed to throw explosive and flammable seeds into the core, and all that was left was to set them on fire. After that, Xinghe activated the aura field Sword Chi Clash and detonated the seeds, destroying the alien's core. Meanwhile, after the death of the alien, the entire water cube was barely holding together and could explode at any moment. So the guys needed to get out urgently. This battle showed how harmoniously and confidently the guys can act, even without Ziying's help. Having moved to a safe place, Zishan destroyed the bubble, and the boys were finally able to exhale. Following this, Xinghe asked Zishan to heal him if she had any strength left. It was a real triumph. And although the main battle was not over yet, the guys felt relieved, because defeating an S-rank alien meant that they could win the Great War too. At the same time, Zing and Tian were in the southern glacier, trying to get as many source stones from the penguins as possible. They also managed to find the last mine of primogems on Blue Star, and with this batch collected, they hoped that it would last until the end of the war. Having collected all the stones, Zing decided to resurrect the penguins, make them part of his army of beasts, and send them to the fifth line of defense to fight for humanity and the Blue Star. Tian became curious as to why, on the way here, Zing had summoned the souls of fallen heroes from all countries except Huaxia. Zing explained that it was because of his personal attachment to Huaxia, because he dreamed that after this external war there would be no internal conflicts in the human world, no hegemony, no racial wars, so that ordinary people could simply live. Tian said that Zing is an idealist, and although his dream is difficult, it is beautiful, and she also wants to see the day he talks about. After that, having collected the stones and increased the army, Zing and Tian set out to meet the space terror.